Chapter 1722. In fact, Arthas was already very careful, trying hard to focus on the direction of Frostmourne's fury. His helplessness lay in the fact that this move was formed by the negative energy generated by the anger and wails of billions of wronged souls. The anger of the souls was always varied, some high and some low. Even as a Lich King, it was difficult for him to perfectly integrate the negative energy generated by billions of wills. This made it exponentially more difficult to control this ultimate move. At most, he could decide the general direction of the pour, but he couldn't decide the energy density of this move. Duque, who had already studied and analyzed this move thoroughly, seized the opportunity. He first used True Mirror Image to trick Arthas into attacking the south, and then he shamelessly used Atish as support to forcibly teleport Queen Sylvanas to the north. Because it was a full-range attack, Duque still had to take some of the power of the fury of the wronged souls. But compared to taking it all in from the front, the pressure that Duque, who was on his back, was on the same level as an itch. Queen Sylvanas lay on Duque's back and giggled, which was rare. "Duque, I find that I love you more and more. I love the way you make Arthas gnash her teeth in frustration, yet there's nothing she can do about it." Duque bared his teeth and thought to himself, "I didn't expect that such a stubborn person like Queen Sylvanas would one day become a bystander who only knows how to cheer 666. Did I lead her astray?" However, at this moment, Duque was simply a model of a righteous hero. On the other hand, Arthas's white hair looked extremely messy. It just happened to confirm the saying, a defeated army is like a collapsed mountain, and there is no way out. After withstanding this ultimate move, Duque pointed at Arthas with the head of his drumstick. "Arthas! You're finished." Arthas didn't need Duque's reminder to know that things were not good. With the fall of all the leaders under him, the Calamity Army, which was a towering tree, had most of its roots cut off. Of course, he had been trying to repair the roots since just now. What he did was no different from patching. If it was just one or two holes, he might be able to fix it. However, the Calamity Army was already a basket full of holes. How could it be mended? In his perception, the number of soldiers of the Calamity troop was still dropping like a cliff. At this moment, the monitor above Duque's head clearly indicated that the total number of Doomsday Troop soldiers had fallen below 100,000. The hateful Allied forces had all become skilled in dealing with the Undying. Not to mention the Calamity Army that had lost their unified command and only had their instincts left. Even if the Calamity Army had a commander, they would still launch tactics such as decapitation tactics or infantry cannons to advance step by step to weaken the Calamity Army. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that there was no way to fight this battle. "However, I'm finished." "No. I'm not done yet." Arthas suddenly perked up, as though she had been injected with some kind of expired chicken blood. She didn't know if it had any effect, but in any case, her aura had risen. He let out a heroic roar, his white eyes turning bloodshot because of the surging shadow energy. "As long as I kill you, I will kill you." "That's right. As long as I kill you, Duke Marcus. I will be able to turn the tables." Faced with Arthas's roar, Duque rubbed his eyebrows in an extremely pretentious manner. Have I ever told you that the top 10 misconceptions in life is, I can kill you?" Pfft. Obviously, Duque's words were all unreliable and venomous, but in the ears of Queen Sylvanas, it became a famous saying. Not only was it full of domineering, but it was also very satisfying. Queen Sylvanas once again burst out laughing without any restraint. This was not the end. Duque shrugged and looked forgetful. "Oh. I forgot that you are not a human anymore. Perhaps you can make an exception?" "An exception? I don't need an exception. I still have." Arthas was interrupted halfway through her sentence. "Do you think you still have an Astrian?" Duque's face was full of mockery. Arthas's heart turned cold. He also knew that his mentality was very much like that of a gambler. He knew that betting was not reliable, but he always deluded himself into thinking that he could turn the tables. Who knew that he would lose everything? This time, even Queen Sylvana spoke, her mockery even more obvious. Don't be silly. We know Anastrian better than you do. He will only stand on the side of the winner. When Sylvana said this, even Duque felt that fate was really strange. Ever since he had transmigrated, many people who should have died in history had survived under his influence. Although not all of them were very happy, at least they had a much better ending than the original bitter ones. However, there was an exception like Anastrian. Originally, in history, he had led all the members of the Silver Moon Council to fight against Arthes in the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, and in the end, all of them died in battle. He and the council had all kinds of arrogant and even corrupt lifestyles. But at the last moment, he did not escape, did not abandon his people, and could be considered to have fulfilled his duty and died for his country. The Sun King might not be considered a hero, but he should at least be a character with a neutral rating. However, such a character, perhaps provoked by Duque's abduction of the Windrunner family, was forcibly turned into a villain. Queen Sylvanas was right. In this life, Anastrian could voluntarily become a lich to protect himself when the Scourge army was strong, and would betray the Lich King and become the leader of the Forgotten when the Lich King declined. He would definitely not mind betraying the Scourge army again. Moreover, this time, he had a very good excuse. At the same time, in the teleportation hall of Naxxramas, Anastrian knelt in front of the Red Dragon Queen who had broken out of the cage. Please forgive me, the sinful me. My soul was forcibly controlled by the will of the Lich King. I can't control myself. Please grant me destruction. Hurry. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can no longer control myself and will hurt you. The Alliance is the best ally of the Horde. Jaina's eyes were full of contempt. She did not believe a word of the Sun King's words. Beside her, Kale, that was silent, but his tightly clenched fists betrayed the excitement and anger in his heart. Kale, that was never a fool, and he instantly understood why. Because of this, he felt even more humiliated. Again. If Jaina was in charge at this moment, and she had the ability, she would definitely destroy the Sun King on the spot. Unfortunately, the person in charge here was Alexstrasza. One of the most important existences in the Alliance army. And in terms of alignment, she was definitely in the good lawful alignment. Chapter 1723. As the head of the dragon aspects that guarded planet Azeroth, Alexstrasza was particular about rules and responsibilities. Even though her expression was not much better, she still chose to accept Anastrian surrender. It's always a good thing that you can control yourself and wake up again. But to prevent you from causing damage, I'll lock you up before I defeat the Lich King. Sinner Anastrian Sunstrider, no objections. The Sun King bowed his unusually eye-catching ice crystal head deeply. With a thought from the Red Dragon Queen, dozens of green vines grew out of the void and bound the Sun King tightly like shackles. On the other side, a small teleportation door suddenly opened in the void, and a green dragon scale flew out, landed on his forehead, and stuck to it. That was Isra's dragon scale to suppress his mental strength that was likely to go berserk. Leave him to me for the time being. Isra's soft female voice came from the void. Okay. The Red Dragon Queen decided. Just as the Sun King was about to be dragged into the prison of the Emerald Dream, the Sun King was shocked to find that his son had walked in front of him. He raised his head in a daze. From his son's fiery red boots, to the familiar gold-lined red robe, and then to the familiar yet unfamiliar face, the Sun King suddenly trembled. Even Jaina looked at Kale, that's curiously. Kale, that's, who was usually gentle and elegant, roared angrily, Anastrian, you are the common shame of the High Elves and the Blood Elves. You are also my shame. You don't deserve the great surname, Sunstrider. Now, in the name of the current head of the Sunstrider family, I announce that you have been stripped of the title, Sunstrider. Are you convinced? This scene made Jaina so happy that she was dancing and applauding. Relief. Too much relief. Anyone with a brain would know that Anastrian had once again become an opportunist. If the Scourge leader in the Ice Crown Fortress were to kill the members of the Alliance hero group, it would snowball. No matter what, this guy would kill Jaina, Kale, and the others, using more heads as a gift to the Lich King. It was a pity that the Alliance hero squad was too strong. Not only had none of them died in battle, but they had even managed to annihilate almost all of Arthesa's subordinates. After failing to steal the weave, Anastrian pretended to be entangled by Isra and surrendered when the opportunity presented itself. He was shameless, but Kale, wasn't polite either. If it had been any other time, Anastrian could have pretended to be the leader of the tribe and ignored Kale, It just so happened that Kale, had intercepted him at this critical juncture, which made him very uncomfortable. Now that he had been labeled as a capricious person, if he didn't tuck his tail between his legs, he wouldn't be able to cry even if Kale, killed him now. With all of his power sealed, he was now no different from the weakest skeleton soldier. His entire body was trembling, but he couldn't find any reason to retort. I was ambushed by the Lich King Arthas, and then my mind was forcibly controlled. I am your father. Before he could finish, Kale interrupted him coldly and sternly, shut up. Kale once had a father, but my father betrayed his people and his son, and despicably chose to end his own life. From that moment on, I no longer had a father. The one standing in front of me is just a despicable lich with the same name. Finally, I'll ask you one more time, if I strip you of the surname, Sunstrider, are you willing? Anastrian said the word I 3 times in a row, but he couldn't continue. The surname Sunstrider was too important. If he kept it, he might be able to use this name to tempt powerful magic elves who were at the end of their lives to be of use to him. He really couldn't bear to give it up. Kale sneered. You can't bear to? Fine. Then, in the name of the patriarch of the Sunstrider family, I'll grant you, an existence who has insulted the name of the Sunstrider, complete destruction. With that, Kale really did accumulate a basin-sized fireball in his hand. Alexstrasza, who was next to him, wanted to stop him, but she just raised her hand and put it down again. She was the guardian of the rules. Since the rules did not allow her to reject the Sun King's surrender, she also had no reason to refuse Kale execution of the family law. As long as Anastrian was still in the Sunstrider family, Kale had the right to kill him. In the end, this was just a means to force him to leave. Seeing that the Red Dragon sister next to him had no intention of interfering, Anastrian finally gave up. Fine. From today onwards, I'm just Anastrian. The voice of his soul was full of coldness and unconcealable hatred. Yes. He even hated his own son. Humph. Kale flicked his sleeves and left. In the end, a sentence was cast from the fiery red back. I will inform all the leaders of the tribe of this decision as the Dalajan Kirin Tor chairman. If the Sun King still had lungs to use, his lungs would have expanded rapidly and he would have exploded on the spot. However, he could not do anything because among the back that his son had left him, there was an even more majestic and insurmountable blue back, the back of Duke Marcus. As long as Duque supported Kale he could not do anything at all. As his whole body trembled, he was slowly submerged by the green liquid from the Emerald Dream. On the void platform of the Ice Throne, Duque received a telepathic message from Alexstrasza. Sorry, I was unexpectedly entangled by that guy. Now that it's settled, do you need help on your side? I don't think so. Besides, my people still have a grudge with Arthas to settle, Duque replied calmly. Really? Free work. The red dragon's sister had a hidden meaning in her words. A lich king who has lost his subordinates is like a grasshopper without legs. He won't be able to jump around for long. Hey! Aren't you just thinking about snacks? I won't give you less. Of course, if it doesn't work, I'll call for help. Duque laughed. The red dragon's sister, who had her thoughts seen through, blushed and shamelessly said, I remember. I want snacks. Different types, at least 100 types. If they're not delicious, I won't accept them. Alright. Duque turned off the telepathic communication and looked at Arthas, who had a very bad expression. I think these people will be very eager to see you. Duque raised his hand and activated the space-breaking power of Atish. A few figures that Arthas was familiar with stepped out of the portal. Chapter 1724. Gavinrad misfortune. Other than Uther, the other 4 of the 5 silver sages were actually half of Arthas's master. In this life, during Arthas's childhood, the 5 sages basically taught him with the strictest attitude. Only Gavinrad, the unreliable general of Stormwind, appeared strict on the surface, but secretly encouraged him to push his own maid. It could be said that Gavinrad was one of the few places that he had a safe haven in his childhood. Tyrion Fordring, another of the 5 silver sages. In a sense, he was very similar to Uther. If Uther was a perfect role model, then he was the symbol of excessive tolerance. Before he disappeared with Karazhan, he was tolerant and compassionate towards many people, even opposing the enslavement of the orcs. If these 2 people, who were both teachers and friends, made Arthas feel uncomfortable, then the next person was the one that Arthas did not want to meet at all. Queen Kalia Menethil, the most gentle and kind sister to him. During his harsh and difficult childhood, she was the only safe haven for his soul, the one and only salvation. When faced with his father, Tyrinas, who had always treated him rudely, he did not hesitate to stab his sword into his chest. If it was Kalia standing in front of him at that time, not to mention hesitating, he was afraid that he would have knelt on the spot and begged for his sister's forgiveness. After all, the other reason he hated his father in this life was because his father forced his sister to die. Who knew that his sister did not die? In order to escape his father's persecution, she faked her death with Duque's help and ran around the world. When he killed his father and master, his sister suddenly came out and announced that his self-proclaimed title of king was invalid, and she became the Queen of Lordaeron. This result at least made him lose half of the reason he had to kill his father. Everything he did after that was more like a mistake on top of a mistake, and he had no choice but to go all the way. Now that he saw his sister, Arthas felt very conflicted. I should have sent people to capture her, and then let you kill her yourself. The one who spoke was the other me in Arthas's soul. This me, of course, was Zul. Almost as soon as Kalia appeared, Arthas felt that the 2 souls that had merged perfectly in his body were showing signs of splitting again. Another voice in his heart immediately warned him sternly, idiot. Don't be distracted. You can no longer go back. You are no longer Karia's naive brother. You've already fallen. You've killed your father, your master, and the thousands of soldiers and civilians of the Rotterdam kingdom. Do you think you can return to your past glory? You are a demon king whose hands are stained with the blood of humans. Yeah. There's no going back. Arthas told herself. Ever since his sister had disappeared 5 years ago at the Door of Darkness, it had been 21 years since he had last seen her. Kalia was still that elegant and peerless sister. Of course, he knew that Duque had given his sister eternal life and youth. That pure beauty was forever fixed at the age of 16, the age when his sister was the most beautiful. Time and age had lost all meaning to his beloved sister. Kalia, who was wearing a priest's robe, saw Arthas take off his helmet. Looking at that familiar yet strange face, the thousands of words in her heart were all stuck in her throat. Her mouth squirmed for a long time, but she couldn't say a single word. Behind Kalia, even more Alliance heroes stepped out of the portal. Feeling the atmosphere, everyone silently stood to the side, leaving time for this noble and fateful pair of siblings. After a long, long time, Kalia finally raised her head. The corners of her eyes were already full of tears. "Arthas, are you doing well?" It sounded a bit nonsensical, but this was the condensation of a sister's more than 20 years of longing for her brother. It had nothing to do with identity, status, or life and death. This was the purest familial love. Inside the Lich King's body, another voice that was exactly the same as Arthas screamed, "Don't answer. You will be weak." Arthas raised his head. "I'm not doing well. Not good at all. And I think today is the day of my destruction." In just 3 short sentences, he expressed his sorrow. He poured out the entanglement, depression, and pain of a lost soul. In his body, the voice had already begun to change. It was no longer like Arthas. It began to change back to Zul's voice. "It's over. Everything is over. Arthas, you idiot." Idiot? Maybe. If I wasn't so stupid, I might have been able to see through Zul's plot. Perhaps I wouldn't have fallen. Perhaps today, I would be standing in front of you with a glorious identity, and crusade against the Lich King, Zul. Arthas said this openly. In the ears of the Alliance's powerhouses, it was a bit confusing. But he was confessing, and also saying it for Zul to hear. From the beginning to the end, his fall was not voluntary. He fell into the trap set by Zul and Kel Thuzad. That was why he fell step by step. At this moment, Arthas seemed to see a paladin in golden armor standing beside his sister. The paladin was young and handsome. He had the same charming blonde hair as his sister, and a handsome face that was popular with thousands of girls. He was the glory of Lordaeron, the future of his motherland. Idiot. You think too much. If you don't kill Tarinas, you will never be able to see the light of day. The soul that had begun to split into Zul sharply mocked Arthas' soul. This time, even the Alliance's heroes heard the strange voice that floated out from the Lich King's body. Tyrion and Gavin Rad, the 2 old men who had been active on the battlefield since World War II, recognized it immediately. Zul's voice? Yes. That's right. Everyone was shocked. On the other side, Arthas did not feel anything from Zul's words. Is that so? Maybe. Kalia moved. Unknowingly, tears had already flowed down her beautiful face like a broken dam. She slowly walked to Duke's side and nestled against Duke's chest. Hey! Arthas, it's not too late. The Alliance has now accepted the Death Knights. Not long ago, Darian Mograine and his Black Blade Knights were officially recognized as legal in the Alliance. You can. Kalia turned her head and looked at Duke. Duke, if Arthas surrenders, can you pardon him? Kalia's words caused a commotion among the Alliance's leaders. Pardon? What kind of joke was that? During the 15 years of the Dark Portal, the Scourge army had ravaged the entire Lordaeron continent, sweeping through many kingdoms including Lordaeron, Kuel Salis, Stromgard, and many others. They had killed so many kings, slaughtered millions of civilians, and dug up the ancestral graves of countless families. If Arthas, the main culprit, could be forgiven, then. Chapter 1725. Without waiting for Duque to reply, Arthas suddenly shouted, "Enough! Are you kidding me? I am the Lich King, Arthas. Arthas, the King of Immortality who rules over this land." Kalia's delicate body suddenly stiffened. She also realized that she had gone too far. If she really insisted on initiating this motion at the throne meeting, it would only make things difficult for Duque and her sisters. She knew that she was not suited to be a queen. She was always more emotional than rational, and would not even use any imperial techniques in order to control her subjects. In a sense, Kalia, who was inclined to rule by doing nothing, was more like Lordaeron's mascot. If not for the fact that her man was Duque, that there were serious foreign enemies in the world, that the military was protected by Theon, Alexandros, and the others, and that the economic lifeline was controlled by the Marcus family, Alterac, and Kultiras, she would have been overthrown by ambitious people long ago. Arthesa's firm refusal actually helped her, and also prevented Duque from being embarrassed. Duque noticed that Arthes did not even mention his surname Menethil. Once, when he occupied Lordaeron, he had given himself this surname, Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. Kalia could not hold it in any longer, and cried loudly on Duque's chest. "What are you crying for?" Arthes' stern voice caused Kalia to stop crying. "Do you think that you've already won? Enough with the jokes. You are facing the Lich King who has swept the entire world with his undead army. Do you really think that I am the kind of enemy that can be easily defeated by an armed parade?" Changing the topic, Arthes proudly raised his head and pointed his nostrils at the crowd, "Or rather, you should cherish the last of your lives. You will soon crawl at my feet and become the servants of me, the greatest existence in the world, the Lich King Arthes." Ha ha ha. He was clearly laughing wildly, but everyone felt as if he was crying. The one who was the most shocked was Kalia, because in her spiritual sea, she heard her little brother's illusory words, "Sister, if I perish, you will be able to save me. Please have a child with Duque, with Menethil as their surname." Kalia almost suspected that her ears were playing tricks on her. She suddenly turned her head and saw the deep sorrow in Arthas' eyes. She finally confirmed that these were Arthas' last words. He suddenly realized that the name of the rune sword in Arthas' hand was very similar to this scene. He had fallen into depravity because of the wrong turn of fate. Amidst the fluttering frost, there stood the sorrowful figure of a king. Frostmourne. Duque hadn't said a word since Kalia came in. Although letting Kalia appear and strike a blow to Arthas' morale was the most important part of Duque's plan, for some reason, Duque still felt that he was a little despicable. Even so, if Duque could do it all over again, he would still make the same choice. Too much blood had been shed from the living. It wasn't just the sacrifices of the Allied forces, but also the logistics. Since the beginning of the Molten Core, they had fought one battle after another. Although the people didn't complain, they silently endured everything. As the supreme leader of the Alliance, Duque knew very well that the Alliance had already overdrawn its economy, people's livelihood, and precious resources. Everything had to be settled as soon as possible. In the face of right and wrong, the sibling relationship between Arthas and Kalia could only become a sacrifice. Since there was no turning back, he would let it enter the end as soon as possible. In the original history, it was because Kalia had gone into hiding that Arthas became the perfect and cold undead king. Until the end. Arthas in this life was definitely weaker than in the original history. This was because from the moment he became a Death Knight, he had been constantly blocked by Duque. Failure after failure had made his heart, which should have been firm and strong, sensitive and fragile. Kalia's appearance caused him, who was at the end of his rope, to plummet even further. In Duque's spirit vision, the originally harmonious and unified souls had split again. This was no different from two half-baked Lich Kings who were incompatible with each other and had no choice but to use the same body. If they could win like this, there would be no justice, so there was no chance for Alexstrasza to appear at all. Not to mention Duque, at this moment, every hero on the Alliance's side had noticed that the Lich King's momentum and strength had both plummeted. They couldn't help but marvel at Duque's strategy. Originally, this would at least be an evenly matched, fierce battle. Now it seemed that this was just an inevitable process. Duque, Kalia, and Arthas were all silent. After a long time, Theon and Gavin Rad finally stood up together, the two of them echoing each other. His Majesty Menethil? Commander Marcus? Arthas? Do you have anything else to say? If not, we want to help Uther, and collect a debt for the billions of souls who died at the hands of the Scourge army, a combination of Ashbringer and Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Windseeker, was already dazzling enough. At this time, the third wielder of the divine weapon joined the ranks. Kalia, who was covered in tears, wiped her face with Duque's sleeve, resolutely held Veronel, and walked behind the two burly paladins. Theon, Gavin Rad, please allow me to participate in the final crusade against my fallen younger brother as Kalia, Kalia said firmly. Welcome, Lady Kalia, this had nothing to do with the country, this was purely a private battle. Sorry to disturb you, please count us in. Servanas held Solidar, Wrath of the Stars, in his hand and walked up to Kalia's side with large strides. The radiance of the four divine weapons almost blinded Arthas's eyes. Behind Queen Say, Riadaline, Hageron, Lillis, and the other elves all stepped forward. Danath Trollbane stood silently beside Tyrion, a two-handed greatsword in his hand. Darian Mograine stood beside Gavin Rad. At this time, the portal opened again, and Jaina and Kale, rushed over and silently joined the ranks. In the end, Duque held Atish, legendary staff of the Protector, and walked into the middle of the crowd. Arthas finally began to laugh maniacally once everyone had regained their footing. He pulled out Frostmourne, and acted like a madman. Ha! Ha ha ha! Am I really that unpopular with people? So many powerful beings want to see me destroyed? Ha ha ha! Very good. Then come, let's see if you will completely destroy me, or if I will enslave all of you. Chapter 1726. Idiot. Idiot. Brainless. In Arthas's spiritual world, Zol's soul was cursing non-stop. Stop. If you really want to completely destroy yourself, you can continue to expand the differences between our souls, Arthas retorted calmly. Zol did not say anything else. He used to be very afraid of death. After death, he was afraid of suffering, and he was even more afraid of having his soul completely destroyed. At this time, his weakness that reached the deepest part of his soul was undoubtedly revealed. Arthas's words had stopped him. Zol even suspected that his choice to fuse with Arthas was the biggest mistake in itself. The souls of the two of them had almost completely opposite personalities. It was very likely because he was weak and old that Zol looked forward to the young, powerful, brave, and full of drive Arthas. If they could reach a consensus, their personalities would indeed complement each other perfectly. Unfortunately, it was all too late now. Arthas had already begun to reject Zol's soul. That was why Zol was called to fill the pot. How could he fill the pot? Even so, Zol still harbored a tiny bit of hope and hoped that the allied army would make a mistake. Damn you, Anastrian. If only I still had that crystal skull. Although I hate that thing, it's really troublesome without it now. Zol continued to pour out his grievances. Anastrian? Ha ha ha. Don't think that the old man's fate will be much better than ours. Believe me, Duque must have deliberately kept him. Zol did not speak again and only sneered coldly. At this time, the battle between the Lich King and the allied army had already begun. Arthas summoned a large group of aberration beasts. These monsters looked a little like octopuses, but their bodies were covered with open mouths. Mal Ladra stomped her hooves and rushed out. Today's main characters are not us, Mal Arad whispered to Imriel. Her hooves would occasionally lose tendons, but she was not a fool. She waved her war hammer and smashed it on the aberration beasts. A total of 5 Wagri shadow guards flew out. These undead creatures wore Valkyrie armor and had a pair of soul wings. As soon as they appeared, they were met with a head-on attack from Tyrant and Chandries. Moonlight rays crossed the void and directly shone on their bodies. Every spot of light made them feel as if they were being burned by lasers. Under the bombardment of the divine spells of the moon goddess cast by the two priests, Wagri was suffering unspeakably. Arthes was also suffering unspeakably. Tyrion Fordring raised Ashbringer high and took the lead in attacking. Unlike the original history, Old Mograine did not die, and Ashbringer did not become Fallen Ashbringer. In the entire Silver Hand and even the entire human world, Ashbringer now represented the paladin's firm belief, the kind that would rather break than bend. Looking at this gigantic holy sword, everyone felt as though they were looking at a shining flag of indestructibility. The old man who had experienced the third battle of the Dark Portal had witnessed this holy sword that had created countless glorious achievements. Along the way, Old Mograine had used it to break through the enemy's encirclement. Now that the sacred sword was in Theon's hands, the one and only remaining holy knight of the first generation was fulfilling his vow to turn his enemies into ashes. He continued to fight bloody battles, embarking on the same glorious path as his former master. It represented humanity's most beautiful soul and praised the greatness and holiness of the holy light. The sacred sword's enemy was only evil. Evil was not eliminated, so the sacred sword had never been sheathed. If it was one-on-one, Arthes had 1,000 ways to kill Theon. With Gavin Rad, who was wielding the wind sword, Arthes felt a little strained. With Servanas and a large group of people coming in for the kill, Arthes was really a little flustered. Just like the Calamity Army, they always liked to win with numbers. This time, it was the human-led hero group's turn to abuse him, and they also won with numbers. There seemed to be a lot of bright lights in the deep void around them. From afar, it was very beautiful. A huge invisible hand was controlling them. It was like a brush in the long river of history, drawing a road that no one had ever seen before. Without this hand, it was likely that the world would become a dead world with only the undead. However, it was this hand that forced a civilization that should have fallen into darkness from the deep and boundless abyss, turning the world around and returning to the right path. Duque did not attack. For Arthes, he was more terrifying than any attacker. Under his spell, the void platform of the Ice Throne seemed to become a painting that shone with a mottled and mysterious light. Only the people involved knew that in this seemingly harmless light, Duque was using magic to cut off the future that should have belonged to Arthes. One by one, Duque silently cut off the energy connection between Arthes and the remaining Calamity Army. With Arthes's meticulousness, he definitely would not pile all the undead in the Ice-Crown Glacier. Only the main force of the Calamity Army was here. In some desolate corner of the continent of Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdom, there must be a large number of the undead. In the original plan, if things went wrong, Arthes could use these undead like batteries, or he could use them as the seeds of the Calamity Army's comeback. What Duque was digging up now was the root of the Calamity Army. After all, Arthes was now protecting the Ice-Crown Fortress with his domain open. Once he withdrew his domain, the Ice-Crown Fortress would immediately be bombarded by nearly 10,000 heavy cannons. Once the Ice-Crown Fortress was destroyed, the largest mana vein node in Northrend would inevitably be lost. In the end, Arthes would still have to kneel. From this, it could be seen how ruthless Duque's attacks were. Zul shouted in the Sea of Consciousness, "We can't let Duque destroy our mana supply so leisurely. Come out. Broken leg. Bad hand." Arthes roared. Suddenly, two deformed monsters rushed out of the void. The muscles on Duque's cheeks twitched. This thing was not in history. The one called Broken Leg was an undead mammoth man. The difference was that this guy actually had 16 broken elephant legs. As soon as it appeared, it immediately sent several people flying with a round of Mandarin duck chain kicks, such as Imriel. Just a little bit more and his hoof would have fallen into the void outside the platform. Duque used Magician's hand to grab the tail of the hoof in midair and saved it. The bad hand was even more disgusting. It looked like a giant human palm with a diameter of at least 10 meters, but there was a big green eye on each knuckle. Chapter 1727. With one slap, Gavin Rad fell to the ground. #@+, Kidney Knights had thick skin and flesh, not to mention a legendary hero. Apart from the wind sword, Gavin Rad had the best epic equipment, so he wouldn't kneel. At the last moment, he even directly activated the Holy Shield technique, but he was slapped into the snow. That was so embarrassing. Bad hand not only flattened Gavin Rad, but it also grabbed Theon with one hand. Theon gave himself a protection blessing, which allowed the target to resist the most powerful physical attacks for a short period of time. The target was basically immune to physical attacks, and during this period, the target could not attack anyone. Of course, if Arthas directly used a divine weapon like Frostmourne, it would be a different story. Not being able to use physical attacks didn't mean that he couldn't attack. Theon grabbed the hilt of his sword and stabbed Ashbringer into the ground with one hand. In the next moment, Arthas saw the dazzling divine golden flame pouring down from the sky. One curtain, two curtains, golden flames poured down like a waterfall. Spreading along the waterfall were holy flames that scorched the ground. The Alliance heroes didn't feel anything. The mutant beasts that were harder than tires squeaked as if they were being burned. It had to be said that the mutant beasts developed by the Calamity Army had terrifying defense and vitality. Ashbringer's golden flames weren't able to burn them to death, but as more paladins and priests rushed forward to finish them off, these monsters could only scream and turn into something that was either charred or sticky, dying in the end. However, Arthas seized the opportunity and charged at Duque. Riding on, invincible, Arthas arrived almost instantly on this small platform. Don't even think about going over. Two huge dwarves blocked the way. The Iron Furnace Fort had never been directly attacked by the Calamity Army, so he didn't have the nerve to fight for the position of main attacker with the other victims. This didn't mean that Magni and the Muradin brothers would abandon their duties. They roared angrily, and they were also burning with a raging battle intent. Their voices actually caused the space around them to tremble. TCH. Arthas spat. There were just too many Alliance experts. After Anastrian had pledged his allegiance for the second time, Arthas found out how Duke had managed to train so many leaders of the Alliance from being ordinary heroes, all the way until they were all legendary tier heroes. Arthas held on to Invincible's reins with her left hand, and her beloved horse made an unscientific 90-degree turn as it galloped forward at high speed, dodging Magna's giant Balrog hammer. At the same time, he swung his sword. Tormented. The surging shadow power shot towards Magni in a conical shape. Even with his deity's descent state, he was not immune to this kind of high-level mystery. Originally, Magni still had the chance to add another hammer strike to stop Arthas. Arthas issued a command through her divine sense, and several tens of massive devil beasts appeared out of thin air before pouncing toward Magna. Even if the blazing flaming devil hammer was right in front of them, they would not stop. This scene was extremely heroic. These failed experiments in the laboratory, these deformed creatures born in the darkness, were like moths flying towards the raging flames of the flaming devil, and were turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. Just because of an order from their master, Arthas, even if they knew they were cannon fodder, even if they could only stop Magni for less than a second, they would risk their lives to stop Magni. An instant was enough for an opportunity. After bypassing Magni, there were no more obstacles between Arthas and Duque. In order to prevent the big Muradin from charging over, he even threw out a pollute, turning the surrounding area of tens of square meters into a deposit of shadow energy. Even a being like Muradin would not survive more than 10 seconds if he were to enter this area. Jaina made her move. She shot out 5 huge icicles. Unfortunately, the difference in their levels was like a chasm. Almost at the instant the icicles were shot out, her control over the icicles was seized by Arthes. Those icicles disintegrated in mid-air, opening up a path for Arthes's charge. She was clearly less than 10 meters away. At this moment, an ice dragon suddenly appeared out of thin air, materializing. Although it only stretched out half of its body, the target of its huge dragon claw was undoubtedly Arthes, not Duque. Because its name was Sapphiron. The second-to-last boss that had once guarded Naxxramas, and now Duque's frost elemental emissary. Traitor! Arthes raised Frostmourne, roared, and slashed at the dragon claw that stretched out. Dragons had extremely hard bones to begin with, and with the frost elementals, ice barrier, level solidification, it would not be an exaggeration to say that its claws were several times harder than steel. With Frostmourne's sharpness, the heavy slash actually made a crisp sound similar to that of swords clashing. Arthes was originally a human. After losing a large amount of shadow energy, her strength could not compare to a bone dragon. After the loud sound, Frostmourne bounced off without any suspense. This slash only left a shallow white mark on the tip of Sapphiron's claw. However, Arthes was not the kind of guy who would give up easily. Frostmourne was clearly the size of a great sword, but under his berserk attack, it became as fast as a sword. The rune greatsword emitting a dark blue light formed 5 phantoms in a row. They only heard, clang, clang, crack, crack, crack. It should have been a continuous sound of metal clashing, but because the 5 slashes hit the same spot, after the second slash, everyone could hear the strange sound of a sharp weapon cutting into ice. Unexpectedly, Arthes completely turned Sapphiron's claw into an existence like ice, and then completely cut it off. Sapphiron immediately let out a blood-curdling scream and let his figure disappear into the void. Scum, I can kill one with 1 slash at my peak, but now it's so troublesome to deal with them. Arthes couldn't help but curse inwardly. Then you still have the nerve to split with me? Nah, Zul cursed back at Arthes. Arthes froze for a moment, but in the end, he did not refute. To him, time was already of the essence. If he could not defeat Duque, he could forget about winning. Since the situation did not allow him to think too much, he pulled the reins, and Invincible once again turned into the phantom that seemed to be able to rush out of the sky and charged at Duque. This time, he did not dare to hold back, and directly slashed at Duque with his final ultimate move, Soul Harvest. He was afraid that Duque would use Flash to escape. However, Duque did not dodge, as if he was waiting for this move, and let the shadow attack hit him. You. Chapter 1728. Arthas looked at Duque in disbelief. He felt that it was unreal. It was too fake. A magic demigod, and one who was proficient in spatial abilities, was determined to escape. Unless there was a very tight trap, there was almost no chance of catching him. Before this attack, he had attacked Duque countless times. Not once was successful. Every time, Duque used the smallest amount of elements to defuse his attack in the lightest way. Pay attention. This was when his soul had not split again, and his state was relatively complete and strong. Now, because of the split of his soul, his strength was actually greatly weakened. He could still have this performance because he was drawing a large amount of magic power stored in the Ice Throne. Even so, the amount of magic power input and output per unit time had been greatly reduced. In this state, it was extremely difficult for him to hit Duque. Arthas had already thought of how to use a series of moves to force Duque into a desperate situation, and finally use Soul Harvest to end it. But Duque was now directly hit. There was only one explanation: Duque saw through the true nature of his move and took the initiative to hit it. How is this possible? In the spiritual sea, Arthas still let out a cry of disbelief. Who cares if it's possible or not? This is our only chance. Nah, Zul said fiercely. As the name implied, soul harvest was to harvest the opponent's soul. Then where did the soul go? Naturally, it was stored in Frostmourne. If Duque was outside and endlessly extracted magic power from the weave to replenish it, it would have been a huge battle of attrition. As Duque dismantled Arthas's magic power connection, it became Duque using unlimited magic power to consume the limited magic power of the Ice Throne. No matter how much magic power was stored in the Ice Throne, it could not withstand the joint attack of Duque and the entire army outside. This kind of all-around consumption, Arthas would at most last half an hour before his magic power would be exhausted. He had to give it his all. Only by capturing Duque into Frostmourne could he completely isolate Duque's magic power connection with the outside world. If things went well, he might be able to subdue Duke's soul and make him a servant of the Lich King during the battle with Theon and the others. Duque? Although Jaina wasn't a demigod, her eyesight was enough to see that Duque had already formed a bad connection with Frostmourne. Duque's powerful elemental powers resisted the shadow energy, but his soul seemed to be pulled by the skull rune sword. Duque turned around and smiled as he waved his hand. Arthas. You underestimate me. I was a Void Lord in the Burning Legion for a period of time. Guess what will happen if you suck me into Frostmourne? Duque's words caused everyone's expression to change drastically. Arthas was surprised that Duke had managed to beat her at her own game. The others were afraid that Duque wouldn't go overboard. Regardless of what the others thought of Duque's actions. Duque's figure suddenly became blurry, as if every molecule that made up his body was disintegrating, like instant oatmeal dissolving into milk. Duque stood near the center of the platform, and everyone could see that the shadow energy on his body was rapidly fading away. In just a few seconds, his figure turned into a stream of light, like an illusion left in everyone's eyes, and sank into Frostmourne, disappearing without a trace. Boundless darkness. There was no light, and it was obscure everywhere. There was no heaven and earth. Everything seemed to be one and indistinguishable. In the thick darkness, only the bone-chilling touch was the most real. Nothing from the outside world was able to penetrate the surrounding environment in the slightest. There was no light in the darkness. For a moment, Duque almost wondered if he had come at the wrong time. But he believed in the system elf, because the retina showed that Arthas's HP had indeed reached the final stage. Duque narrowed his eyes. Suddenly, there seemed to be a flash of light in the darkness far away. Even an epic-ranked ranger with amazing eyesight would not be able to see through the thick fog. Duque saw it. With a thought, the arcane hand that he condensed with arcane elements pounced forward and tore the opening in that direction even wider. Cutting off the connection with the magic net and the elemental realm, Duque was using the elements and magic power that had accumulated in his demigod body. The darkness was surging. The world in Frostmourne seemed to be trying to stop Duque from exploring the secrets inside. Unfortunately, Duque was faster. Following the coordinates locked by the system elf, an arcane missile was launched like a light cannon. Suddenly, the dark fog seemed to be torn open, and a fierce battle unfolded in Duque's vision. It wasn't a scene that could be captured with normal vision. It was a battle of souls against souls. In his green spirit vision, there was only a highly concentrated beam of spiritual light shooting down from what was theoretically a dome, shining on a seemingly illusory magic array platform. In the middle of the magic circle, there were several incomplete humanoid spirits lying on the ground. In their broken limbs, something similar to fire was burning. The burning produced wisps of smoke-like things that slowly rose and drifted to the high altitude, where they were absorbed by the highly concentrated spiritual light. When each wisp of smoke gathered into the stream of spiritual light, it would form a strange symbol. Seeing this, Duque naturally thought of the evil sacrificial rituals that the Burning Legion fanatics used to summon demons. The only thing that surprised Duque was the two people fighting in the magic array. As a transmigrator, of course, Duque knew that the soul of King Tyrrhenas, who had been stabbed to death by Arthas, would attack at this moment. Originally, the soul guard of Frostmourne was supposed to be fighting with Tyrrhenas. But when Duque glanced at the so-called soul guard, his eyelids twitched in fear. What the hell is a soul guard? Zul, what the hell are you doing here? Duque didn't realize at this moment that it was because he attacked Arthas through Kalia that Arthas's originally perfectly fused soul split again. In the end, this was still his fault. Duque only knew that he was no match for Zul. Perhaps in the outside world, he could defeat 100 Zul without panting. But not here. In Frostmourne, there was a unique law that even the system elf couldn't immediately analyze. Here, at least at this moment, Duque couldn't deal with Zul. Duke Marcus. I've finally found you. When Zul saw Duke, he immediately chased after him with his buttocks trembling. Chapter 1729. Duque was speechless. He ran away without saying a word. With a wave of his left and right hands, the surrounding shadow energy enveloped his figure. In the next moment, Duque turned himself into a shadow priest and used the ultimate skill, Dissipate. When Duque temporarily broke down his body into shadow energy form, it was Zul's turn to be speechless. If it weren't for the consecutive battles between Northrend and Duque, Zul's understanding of Duque would still be stuck at more than 20 years ago. Even when Anastrian joined the Scourge army for the second time, he only got superficial information. The Sun King had no way of knowing that Duque had been seriously injured when he stabbed Archimonde to death. Instead, he had developed the strange sub-profession of Shadow Priest. It was even more impossible for him to know that Duque had been the Burning Legion's Void Lord. After Grom had reported to Thrall, Thrall hadn't informed Anastrian about it. The difference in information caused Zul to be caught off guard. Duque escaped in a somewhat awkward manner. But it was just a little awkward. As time passed, the system elf's analysis became more detailed. Duque thought to himself, well, this is the shadow energy storage place for Frostmourne. There's nothing to see there. Since it was the Lich King's private property, the shadow energy inside must have been marked by the Lich King. It was not impossible for Duque to seize it, but it would take a lot of time and effort, and it would also alarm Zul. Then, the place where the souls are imprisoned should be here. Duque, the great thief, first found the place where ordinary souls were imprisoned. Looking at the huge messy cage below that imprisoned thousands of souls, Duque did not even want to look at it, even though it was very likely that any random soul fragment inside could contact a Scourge army commander in the outside world. Duque continued to move forward and came to a more secluded place. There were indeed 2 soul guards in front of him, and they also had considerable power. However, in this sword world filled with shadow energy, Duque could maintain the state of dissipate for quite a long time. In their hollow vision of the spiritual world, Duque was no different from an ordinary shadow energy smoke. Perhaps this was also because Frostmourne had never had a true enemy since it was forged. Duque slipped in easily. This is, transforming back into his human form, Duque easily activated a mechanism on the wall. The bottom of the room opened up, and several altars rose up. A few soul fragments had been separated and kept on those altars. The altar was actually supported by several independent spaces that resembled safes. The system concluded that the activation method of this place was actually voice control. Do I need a verbal password? Duque frowned. System, imitate Arthas' voice. In the next moment, Duque opened his mouth again. Duque started trying random passwords. Frostmourne? Arthas Menethil? Lich King? After Duque tried 7 or 8 times, he had an idea. Sister. Kalia? Immediately, the altars reacted. Several altars began to move on their own and piece together. When the independent spaces merged, the soul fragments inside also began to fuse. When these fragments finally completely fused together, they suddenly squirmed as if they were alive. They went against the flow and grew in the air. In the end, they actually formed a black soul skull. Ha! It's actually his soul? It had to be said that Duque had a very unexpected harvest. Duque raised his hand and gently used the Void Duke's technique to collect the large soul fragment into his hand. Then, he activated Dissipate again and left the room. Duque continued to look for a way to break Frostmourne from the inside. Just defeating Zul did not seem to be enough. However, the flow of time in the sword was obviously different from the outside world. The system estimated that it was about a quarter of the flow of time in the outside world. Finally, after a few turns, Duque came to the top of Frostmourne, where the hilt should be. In front of Duque was the soul of a man with a confused appearance. His eyes were closed, as if he was sleeping. But Duque knew that this soul should be trapped in a perpetual cycle of dreams. Only the extremely weak and slowly flickering soul fire in his chest proved that this soul had not been completely annihilated, and was not an empty shell that only had the appearance of a facade. Duque did not know who this soul was, but he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Duque was sure that he should have seen this person before. But here's the question. Who is this existence that Arthas has trapped, nurtured, and even refused to destroy? Arthas' soul? At the same time, the fierce battle in the outside world had reached the most critical juncture. When Arthas once again activated Frostmourne's wrath, almost everyone outside was injured. Fortunately, the soul power reserve in Frostmourne had long since fallen below the warning line, so the power of wrath was greatly reduced this time. The three big men, Magni, Gavin Rad, and Tyrion, were all at the forefront, and the two paladins had activated their invincibility and forced their way through with holy light. Arthas! Do you remember your father, Tyrinas? Tyrion roared as he slashed Ashbringer. Yes. I stabbed him to death with my sword. Arthas laughed maniacally as if he had given up on himself. He used Frostmourne to clash with Tyrion's sword, forcing Tyrion to retreat. Do you still remember Uther? Gavin Rad pounced and fought with Arthas again. When Arthas blocked Queen Sylvanel's arrow and Magni's hammer, Kalia blasted her hammer at Arthas from afar. Valinal's holy golden light blasted Frostmourne. After this, the famous Frostmourne was no longer intact. At this moment, everyone heard a sudden metallic hum. This was the sorrowful cry of the demonic sword. The golden light spun as if it was going to drill into the blade. Frostmourne's blade suddenly caved in, and a beam of golden light of different hues shot out from it. The two different hues of golden light blended together and flowed into the patterns on the rune sword. The entire sword began to shine. This was not the blue and white evil light that Frostmourne had always emitted. This was holy light that was the complete opposite of evil. Ah! Unable to control the demonic sword in his hand, Arthas watched his demonic sword float in the air with the blade facing down, hovering in the middle of the ice platform. Impossible, Arthas was completely stunned. Chapter 1730. Ha! At this moment, Theon roared, and a brilliant golden light swept across. Ashbringer was about to hit the defenseless Arthas. Suddenly, Frostmourne, which had lost control a moment ago, flew back and blocked in front of Ashbringer. Clang, amidst the earth-shattering noise. The larger Ashbringer hit Frostmourne heavily, sending it and Arthas flying with their swords. Like a cannonball fired from an old-fashioned cannon, Arthas fell heavily to the ground, and then bounced high on the ice platform. She rolled 7 or 8 times in a row before finally stopping. Everyone was stunned, not because of the tragic situation of the Lich King Arthas, but because Frostmourne shattered. Clang! The blade was still surrounded by blue and black light, the evil runes cast on the blade, the fierce and lifelike skeleton blade. Every part represented the supreme status of the Lich King. However, in the instant that time froze, they all crumbled like butterflies in a storm. In this life, because of Duque's obstruction, Frostmourne's battle record was not so shocking. If it was the original history, the heroes and legendary monsters that died under Frostmourne could be written into a chronicle. Black Dragon Cernox, Blue Dragon Saphiron, Kel Thuzad, Tyreenas, Gavin Rad Uther, Sylvanas, Anastrian Sunstrider, Orc Sword Saint Jubelsos, Antonidas, Lordaeron Scourge Resistance Organization Justice Guard Leader Margolos, Lordaeron Scourge Resistance Organization Circle of Holy Light Leader Halak, Lordaeron Resistance Organization Extreme Force Leader Daglin, Edronera Barakni Queen Nissa Azri, Bronze Beard Dwarf Bergen Firebeard Leader of the surviving members of Muradin Northrend Expedition, Draenor Seraphar, Valdemar of the Wagri clan. Not to mention, Arthas had defeated Illidan, Kael, that's, Dreadlord Mal'Ganis, and the current leader of the Black Edge Knights, Darien. Just look at this shocking list of names. Even with Duque changing fate, more than half of the kings and peerless experts still fell under Frostmourne's sword. Although the strength of Lich King Arthas was not necessarily stronger than Thun and the other ancient gods, Arthas's battle record was more direct and more terrifying. It was this runic demonic sword that had killed countless experts and had a glorious battle record. However, at this moment, it was finally destroyed by a group of experts with god artifacts. No. Frostmourne shattered, and Arthas could clearly feel the magic power in her body plummeting like a river. He still didn't give up. He stretched out his hand in the direction of Kalia. Be careful. Gavin Rad raised a gust of wind with his wind sword and swept Arthas up. In midair, Sylvanas used Solidar to fire a lightning arrow at Arthas' throat. Unexpectedly, the arrow successfully pierced through Arthas' neck. No one would lower their guard against a king who stood at the pinnacle of the undying realm. Both Tyrion and Magni arrived. Firelord's hand smashed into the back of Arthas' black armor. The dark black armor of the Lich King began to disintegrate with the shoulder blade as the center. Ahead, Tyrion's Ashbringer had indeed struck Arthas' left shoulder, and a huge wound extended from the left shoulder through the chest all the way to the lower right side of the abdomen. Holy golden light then violently invaded the Lich King's body. Just as Tyrion was about to kill and cut off Arthas' head on the ground, he suddenly found that the holy hammer, Valinor, had unknowingly appeared in front of him. The current queen of Lordaeron, Kalia, Arthas' sister, gently raised her hand and said two words, enough. No. Be careful, Tyrion was very worried. Because he was so nervous, he even stuttered. It's over. An old voice that was strangely familiar to many people came from the void. In the next instant, two illusory figures, one silver and one gold, rose from the magic sword shards. Seeing the appearance of these two specters, almost everyone subconsciously stopped. No way. Gavin Rad's mouth was as wide as it could be, so wide that a big apple could be stuffed in. Impossible. Tyrion, who had always been strong-willed and would not easily back down at any time, could not believe his eyes at all. The figure with the illusory golden crown had long white hair, and he wore a white robe with complicated patterns, showing the dignity of the owner of the robe when he was alive. The other figure was wearing a golden helmet and golden armor, which was typical of the standard armor of the Silver Hand Knights 10 years ago. Their identities were naturally, the former king of Lordaeron, Tyreenas, and the head of the 5 Silver Saints, Uther. Everyone fell into a complete state of shock. No one thought that after Arthas killed his father and master, he would actually imprison their souls in Frostmourne. Their souls had not been corrupted, nor had they been completely destroyed. Perhaps this was Arthas' last trace of kindness, or some other reason. Perhaps it was too difficult to find out. At this time, Duque's figure came out from the magic sword shards. "Duque. Are you alright?" Jaina and the other girls asked frantically. Duque shook his head. "I'm fine. Next, it's the Menethil royal family's matter." Everyone tacitly stepped back, leaving the space in the middle for Arthas, Kalia, and Tarina's. The dark energy in Arthas's body had already receded like the tide. Without the support of the dark energy, all of Arthas's organs were rapidly deteriorating. Arthas seemed to want to struggle, but in the end, he could not even move his waist. He had already lost the feeling of his lower body, and could only raise his hands in the air in a somewhat ridiculous manner, as if he was trying to grab something. A gentle and slender hand held his right hand, while a spiritual hand held his other hand. Arthas asked in a trembling voice, "Father? Sister? Everything is over." Kalia used her other hand to gently caress that familiar yet cold face. She did not have the time to talk about the 20 years of longing that had accumulated in her heart, and she did not have the time to look back on the beautiful moments of the past. In the end, she could only helplessly say yes. Yes. Arthas suddenly smiled bitterly. His eyes that had almost completely lost their sight seemed to have seen the collapse of the world of the dead, and the final collapse of the kingdom that belonged to him. How beautiful the Lordaeron that should have belonged to him was, how majestic his army of undead was, and how majestic it was, sweeping across the entire continent. But at this moment, everything had become a fleeting cloud. Tarina's lowered his head and let out a long sigh. "My child, in the end, no king can live forever." Arthas suddenly smiled bitterly. Was it regret? An epiphany? A pity? Or despair? No one knew. The great Lich King's last words were, "In front of me is only endless darkness." Chapter 1731. Anyone with the slightest elemental sensitivity could sense that the remaining shadow power was rapidly dissipating from Arthas' body. In a sense, the demon sword, Frostmourne, was the true form of the Lich King. When the runic sword was destroyed, all the power belonging to the Lich King naturally dissipated. Watching Arthas die in the truest sense of the word, everyone present felt a sense of loss and a strange emptiness in their hearts for some reason. Even though a heinous evil sect leader had died, they felt as though they had lost a hero. Arthas' last sentence seemed to be telling everyone that he regretted what he had done in the past and had given up on the pursuit of reincarnation. In Azeroth, a person could become a vengeful spirit after death and be bound to a certain place like a earthbound spirit. For example, in the Kalimdor continent of Azhara, the vengeful spirits of the High Elves drifted in the ruins of the ancient Elven Empire for 10,000 years. Or, like Arthas, their spirits completely dissipated and returned to nothingness. Duque muttered softly, "There is no heaven or hell here. We can only rely on ourselves." Yes. Unknowingly, Duque's women gathered around him. Not only Alucia, Jaina, and Tyrant, but even Sylvanas, who had become more independent after becoming the Blood Elf Queen, came over and gently tugged on Duque's sleeve. A cold whistling sound came from the sky. No one noticed that with the destruction of Arthas' soul, the Ice Throne had once again become a part of the Ice Crown Fortress and was no longer a floating platform in the void. The domain around the Ice Crown Fortress had been removed. Faced with the fortress suddenly exposed within the range of the cannons, Bulang almost wanted to order the entire army to open fire on the spot. "Everyone, don't open fire. The Lich King Arthas has been defeated by the Alliance of Heroes. I repeat." Duque's voice was transmitted through all the communication networks of the Alliance. "Long live. We've won. Oh. Wait a minute. Why are those damned bones still attacking us?" Discordant voices suddenly came from the communication networks. The ownerless undead that had been blindly wandering around the Ice Crown Fortress suddenly seemed to have entered a berserk state as they attacked the allied army crazily. If that was all, it would have been fine. What was even more terrifying was that even the skeletons of the Calamity soldiers that had been destroyed once on the ground began to assemble themselves again, turning into various deformed skeletal demons that attacked the coalition army. This time, the allied forces were really caught off guard. Fortunately, they had received strict training. For example, if the rear was ambushed, they should form a small defensive formation on the spot to cover each other and ensure that the team remained intact. If there was a problem with the Ice Crown Glacier, it was still within the realm of possibility. What made Duque and the leaders of the Alliance change their expressions was the report of an attack on their homeland in the Magic Communication Channel. Report. This was Eagle Nest Mountain. Damn it. So many troll skeleton soldiers. Heavens, those bones are attacking all living things, including wild hammer dwarves and living trolls. This is the Holy Light Chapel. We were ambushed. Those damned bones are actually hiding at the bottom of the lake. This is the Satin Farm in the Western Wilderness, damn it. I saw Joshua's grandfather who had been dead for 30 years. Damn it. He's too strong. Are these elite skeletons? Every leader of the Alliance looked at each other. Although it was Kel Thuzad who controlled the flying fortress Naxxramas to wreak havoc in the Eastern Kingdom during the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, no one knew that the Calamity Army had so many backup plans. Magni said to Duque anxiously, "We need to go back and take charge of the situation immediately." "No. We have more important things to do." At this time, Tarina's soul, who had been kneeling beside Arthas, slowly stood up. "I have been trapped in Frostmourne for more than 10 years. In these days, I know more about the dark side of this world than any of you." This. Magni was speechless. Everyone looked at the former leader of the Alliance. Tyrrhenus shook his head. "This world has changed. Under the efforts of the two Lich Kings, the boundary between life and death has become very blurred. This is because the Lich King secretly changed part of the world's laws when the world's will was asleep." Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air at the same time. Who would have thought that Arthas would actually do such a thing during the 10 years that she had been asleep? The Calamity Army has become a synonym for all the dead in the world. Without Master's command, the endless Calamity Army will only become more and more of a threat to this world. We cannot stop controlling it. There must always be a Lich King. After Tyrrhenus finished, the entire Alliance hero group almost went berserk. What? Damn it. We launched this great expedition, sacrificed so many people, and wasted so many resources, not to kill a Lich King, so that the next Lich King can come to power and kill us. While everyone was arguing, Tyrrhenus reached out his hand and pointed at Darian Mograine. "Since Death Knights can join the righteous side, why can't we allow a Lich King who believes in the Holy Light and is willing to fight for the righteous cause of Azeroth?" Tyrrhena's words made sense, and no one could refute him. "You mean?" Imriel tried to ask. "If there is a strong man with a strong body that can withstand a large amount of shadow energy, and a strong will that will not be corrupted by the grievances of billions of undead, he will become the new Lich King. One day, he will be the greatest help to the Alliance." Tyrrhenus said with certainty. Everyone was silent. First, the strongest body was enough to eliminate everyone who had not reached legendary hero level. Then, there was the condition of having a strong will. In fact, the candidates had already been decided, Duque and Tyrion. Gavin Rad should have been able to do it, but ever since he became a paladin who trained in lightning, his direction of development was a little off. Duque had endured the most terrifying shadow corruption, and he became the world's first shadow priest. But obviously, Duque was not suitable. Not only was he the supreme commander of the Alliance, but he was also the man of several queens. Who could bear the thought of their own man becoming the king of the undead? Without the slightest hesitation, Theon stepped out of the ranks. He held Ashbringer in one hand and said loudly, "It seems that I am the only one who can bear this heavy burden. No one else can." Chapter 1732. Before Tyrion Fordring could finish, Uther suddenly interrupted him. "Tyrion, you hold a cruel fate in your hands, brother. But it doesn't just belong to you. Wait. You don't have a body." Gavinrad was a little confused. Uther smiled and shook his head. Tyrinas raised his scepter, and suddenly a mysterious sarcophagus broke out from under the ice platform. Uther's golden soul slowly stepped into the sarcophagus. When the sarcophagus opened again, what appeared in front of everyone was a Death Knight named Uther the Lightbringer. The other two, who were once part of the 5 Silver Saints, could not believe their eyes. They all clenched their fists. Tyrinas sighed. After Arthas killed Uther, he moved his body here. That child always wanted his teacher to become a Death Knight, because that way, he could have one of the few Death Knights in the world that could rival him. He tortured Uther and tried to persuade him, but Uther never agreed. Uther laughed at himself, his face deathly pale. "Ha! This is my first time being a Death Knight. But I just destroyed Zul's soul, and from his soul fragments, I got some Death Knight skills. Maybe I'll be a very good Death Knight." This kind of joke, which was so cold that it made people despair, naturally did not attract any laughter. Uther also gave up. He pointed at the symbol of the Lich King, the crown of ice that Arthas had always worn. "Do it, Tyrion. You and these brave heroes have your own destiny to fulfill. Leave this final sacrifice to me. In any case, I was already a dead man 11 years ago." Wuther's heroic voice resounded through the world. The wind was howling. Everyone's heart gradually lost its temperature due to the pain of the ice and snow of Northrend. Uther strode in front of Duque. "Duque, thank you for releasing my soul, and thank you for all you've done for the Alliance all these years. I had failed in raising Arthas. Now I'm just shouldering my responsibility. Don't be sad for me, don't be sad for me. This is nothing but the self-redemption of a lost and suffering soul." Duque's mouth squirmed for a long time, but he couldn't say anything in the end. This was 2F** Ket up. He had deliberately hidden Bolvar Fortijin. Well, Bolivar had been saved, and Uther, who was even more formidable, had been lost. From Duque's point of view, Uther was even more powerful and awesome. If he could bring Uther into the weave, the weak holy system that could only heal and not attack would become the strongest branch of the weave. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. This was fate. Perhaps, this was not a bad ending. No matter what, it was better than Uther, the strongest holy knight in history, completely retiring from the stage of history. However, since Uther had decided to become the Lich King. In that case, what kind of power would this Lich King, who was probably the strongest Lich King in history, display at the time of Return of the Legion? Duque suddenly had deep expectations. The third Lich King was already so awesome. Wouldn't the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of the 3rd generation under him rise as well? Duque's mind was in a mess. He could only watch in a daze as Uther left him and walked towards his old brother. This was not Uther's fault. In this life, Uther rarely had the chance to interact with Duque. To be honest, Duque was not good at dealing with people who were pure in their beliefs. They were almost like ascetics or Puritans. In addition to the 5 years at the Dark Portal, Duque had been blasted into the void with Karazhan. He and Uther were not really close friends. They were just slightly better than nodding acquaintances. Gavinrad. Uther. Because Gavinrad was not from Rotterdam, his relationship with the other 4 holy knights was far from close. This did not prevent them from seriously understanding each other, and during the days of fighting side by side at the Dark Portal, they had forged a deep friendship. After talking for about 3 minutes, Uther hugged Gavin Rad again. Finally, he stood in front of Tyrion. Among so many people, his friendship with Tyrion was the deepest. Among the 5 Silver Saints, Tyrion's philosophy and ideas were the closest to his. Thanks to this life, Tyrion had been blasted into the void with Duque, and there had not been a falling out between Tyrion and Uther. The friendship between them could be said to be stronger than gold. After some small talk, Uther said solemnly, "You must forget me, Tyrion. If this world is to be freed from the shackles of fear, no one must ever know what happened here today." "But, you..." Tyrion choked. Uther's face was stern, and his words were sonorous. "I heard that you worship my name as sacred. In that case, you should tell them that the Lich King is dead. Uther's soul, which was captured by Arthas back then, has long since dissipated. Go. Leave this place. Never come back." Finally, Tyrion nodded heavily. The alliance of heroes left. Many people looked back with every step they took. From time to time, they would look at the familiar figure sitting on the throne of ice. He was wearing the most sacred armor of the Silver Hands, and his body was emitting a brilliant holy light that did not match at all. But he was crowned with the Lich King's crown of the dead. The only good thing was that he was not too lonely. A former king stood beside him as a servant. "Is this, okay? Your Majesty?" Uther smiled bitterly. The king that he had sworn to serve for the rest of his life had become his assistant. What the hell was this? The living return to the living, the dead to the dead. Right now, I am just a soul atoning for my sins. I was once a good king, but also a terrible father. If this can truly put my son's soul to rest, I will do it. Besides, I still have Kalia. Since the bloodline can continue, I am satisfied. I am satisfied. Tarina said seriously. Your Majesty. Uther sighed. Tarina showed a somewhat funny smile. No, 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 you are my Majesty now. When Duque and the others stepped out of the Ice-Crown Citadel, the entire Ice-Crown Citadel immediately formed huge blocks of ice and began to seal the entire citadel. This scene caused the Alliance soldiers to open their eyes wide and tongue-tied. Then, Tyrion raised the blade of Frostmourne, which only had half of it left. The Lich King Arthas has been defeated by the Alliance of Heroes. Chapter 1733. Oh, oh, oh. Hooray! We've won again. Among the Alliance soldiers, there were a small number of Draconians, and Death Knights from the Black Edge Knights. They welcomed the victory with the same ecstasy. Good news came from the Magic Communication Network. Oh, oh, oh. What did our kings do? The Undying have fallen again. Eagle Nest Mountain is safe again. Should we attack the trolls who are still alive? Holy Light Chapel is safe, damn it. I want to apply for funds to send 100 frogmen down to the lakes to see if there are any bones left. Duque could only smile bitterly and lie to the Undying's reports that it was Arthas' last burst of energy. He couldn't possibly say that their most worshipped Wother Lightbringer, the head of the 5 Silver Saints who represented the ultimate power of light, had changed his profession and become a Lich King, right? Standing behind Theon, Duque fully understood why Theon was the one who rushed to announce the complete destruction of Arthas and the Scourge army. Since the strongest paladin could sacrifice his soul for the peace and stability of the world, he, not so strong, paladin, could also lie for this purpose. Duque was already a demigod, a perfect existence that was completely deified by the entire Alliance. Whether Duque was willing or not, he was a model for mortals to ascend to godhood, a role model that the world worshipped. In terms of political propaganda, Duque was a perfect existence. Therefore, the lie that the Lich King was dead and there was no more Scourge army could not be blamed on Duque. If something happened in the future and they really needed to use the Scourge army again, wouldn't it be a slap in the face if they suddenly said that Wuther was the Lich King and the current Lich King was on their side? Theon decisively took this possible blame. Overall, the northern expedition was a great success. Great sacrifices were made, and an astronomical amount of food and ammunition were consumed, but the peace of Northrend undoubtedly brought the dawn of peace to the world. Duque let out a long sigh of relief. Historically, Azeroth could be said to be one pot after another, with no respite at all. This was because the other ancient gods had also decided to descend upon the world of Azeroth after witnessing the destruction of Yogg-Saron. When Neltharion, the Wing of Death, recovered from his last battle with Azeroth, he would be bewitched by the ancient gods and summon the elemental army to launch a great purge of the world of Azeroth. When the Wings of Death broke out of the Earth elemental plane where he was recovering from his injuries, the deep rock continent, a huge earthquake would cause a cataclysm that would tear the entire world apart. Yes, that was indeed the case in the original version. In this life, the Winged Brothers were already dead. Darkwing's head hung from the 5th floor. The skin of the celestial wings thumped loudly. Speaking of which, Nisario's skull seemed to have been stolen. In any case, Duque really didn't think that the Wings of Death would have the same destructive power as before. After all, in the original history, the Wings of Death had never died. He was only injured and went into hiding. Then, he gave Enzos and the other ancient gods a shot of adrenaline, which made him so fierce. Now, the Wings of Death had been broken into 18 pieces. Not only was his soul ground down, but his dragon body was also destroyed by Maligos, who hated him at that time. If the Wings of Death had simply been resurrected as an undead dragon, Duque believed that he could let the Wings of Death overturn him with one hand. Of course, Duke was prepared for any eventuality. After all, in the Cataclysm, the final boss who came out to cause trouble was Nisario, but there were also a few other guys who were quite powerful. For example, Duque's old friends, the Flame Demon King Ragnaros, and the Wind Elemental Lord Al-Akir. I don't know why. I can feel the elements of the earth, it seems to be a little abnormal, Duque said to everyone. Jaina narrowed her eyes. Could it be that you extracted too much elements during the battle with Arthas? Nonsense. You dug a cup of snow on the edge of the Icecrown Glacier and used it as ice cream. Wouldn't that cause the Icecrown Fortress to collapse instantly? Duque rolled his eyes at Jaina. The huckster Duque simply made a decision on his own. I'm a little worried about the stability of the Eastern Kingdom. After all, the undead calamity may break out again. Let the Dalajan and half of the flying fleet go back first. Although Duque's order was a little rushed, the soldiers were eager to go home after the battle. After all, they had been in this godforsaken place where peeing in the wild for more than 30 seconds would freeze. Who wouldn't want to go back to that warm home? Eager to return home, not many people suspected that Duke was abusing his official position for personal gain or something. Most of them cheered as they carried out the order. Duque seemed to casually issue a strange order like, after returning to the Eastern Kingdom, at least 1/3 of the flying fleet must be on standby in the air, and intentionally or unintentionally let the army avoid some specific areas. Then, Duque completely relaxed and enjoyed the journey of dividing the spoils. Wuther became the 3rd Lich King, and the treasures of the 1st and 2nd generation naturally became the heroes' spoils of war. One had to know that back then, Arthas had led the Scourge army to sweep through most of the Lordaeron continent. How rich were the spoils of war? Now, Arthas' spoils of war had also become the spoils of the Alliance's heroes. But now, it was more like returning the items to their rightful owners. Farinrush Kuel Salus Protector was a crossbow that looked a little like a blue Kiraji Bugman. Originally, this crossbow was not that powerful, but after the Scourge craftsman adjusted it and added frost damage, this crossbow became the top crossbow. It was only slightly inferior to Queen Sheila's artifact, Solidar. Saying it was slightly inferior was mainly because of its level. In reality, in Azeroth, an artifact was an artifact, and there was no such thing as being outdated. An extremely strengthened epic weapon might be stronger than the epic weapons that had been born before, but no matter how strong it could not be stronger than the same type of artifact. This was the limit in reality. There were a total of 3 crossbows, and in the end, they were happily accepted by Lilith, Chandris, and Lore, Themar. Heaven's Fall, Blade of Great Lie, was a dagger, and the thick blade looked very much like a kitchen knife. In reality, the size of this dagger was not large. As they did not confiscate Illidan's pair of Azeroth's dual blades, this epic dagger was given to Vanessa after some discussion. Looking at the strange inscription on the dagger, Lies Hurt, Flattery Ruin, Vanessa did not know why, but she rolled her eyes at Duque. The following division of the spoils was a little more formal. As the strongest bosses basically had artifacts, most of these epic equipment were given to whoever wanted it. Chapter 1734. There was a one-handed axe called, Summon of Calamity, Lordaeron's Axe of the King. It was a decent axe. It was a pity that there was an ugly skull on the blade. The Alliance did not have many warriors and death knights. If it was in the past, it would have been used as a souvenir. This time, the Horde had sent someone over. Even though Varrock had joined the tribe as a private individual, Duke still gave him enough face. He was an extremely dedicated and loyal warrior who had survived from the Battle of the Dark Portal to the return of the army. There were 2 axes, and they were both given to the father and son. Yes, little Seraphar had been saved. Even though Drano had to bear the humiliation of losing and being controlled, he returned to the Horde as a Death Knight. It could be predicted that Thrall, who had wanted him to be the next chief, would have no choice but to choose his successor from the other candidates. At least Varrock did not have to lose his son completely. After taking the Axe of the King, Varrock said that he had to quickly go back to Thrall to ask for forgiveness. He hoped that Thrall would forgive him for disobeying orders and fighting on his own. The father and son left. In fact, if it was not for the fact that the Axe of the King had given them so much power, Varrock would not even have the face to take it. Varrock took the axe and bowed deeply to Duque. Duke Marcus, this is not the first time we have met. But every time I fight alongside you, I can feel your wisdom, bravery, and generosity. You are a perfect leader. If possible, I hope to have more opportunities to fight alongside you in the future. I hope that the Horde and the Alliance will never go to war again. Varrock was sincere, but there was a tinge of bitterness under his sincerity. Because as the supreme commander of the tribe, he had already sensed that something was amiss. He knew, and so did Duque. They just did not point it out. Duque smiled. I think that day will come. To the onlookers, this was just Duke's politeness. Only the 2 female evil demons hiding in the shadows raised the corners of their mouths. It was a silent sneer. Delano, who was at the side, still felt like he was dreaming. He, who was bent on fighting the Lich King, died under Frostmourne. Originally, he thought that his twisted heart would forever bear the fall. Unexpectedly, the hero team led by Duque had defeated Arthas. The person who had saved him from the swamp of despair was Grom, whom he had once admired. What was worse was that Grom was now a direct subordinate of Duque. The entanglement in his heart made Delano unable to accept this reality for a very long time after he regained his sanity and freedom. In the end, he also bowed to Duque. Duke Marcus. I never liked you. That doesn't mean I don't approve of you. This time. Delanos's dead face puffed up, and Varrock slapped him hard on the back. Delanos finally said, I thank you. Let's just say that I owe you 3 lives. I will definitely find a chance to return the favor. Don't worry, I'm already an Undying, I won't become your servant like Grom." After saying that, Delanos actually turned around and left angrily. "Sorry, he's actually." Varrock was embarrassed. Duque shook his head. "It's okay, I understand. He's just honest and doesn't want to express his feelings." Varrock punched his chest with one hand. If the beast men bowed, it was out of personal gratitude. Then punching the chest meant the greatest degree of approval for the other party. Varrock and his son left. After they left, the remaining alliance powerhouses in Naxxramas suddenly became lively. Kale, that's discussed it with Jaina. He took the Blood Surge Kel Thuzad Sword of Pain, while Jaina took the most valuable staff, Jakuz Antonida's Holy Staff. Without discussing the special meaning, the magic strength bonus brought by the two magic weapons was the same. The only difference was that the Sword of Pain provided more magic critical strike chance, while the Holy Staff gave higher endurance and spirit bonuses, as well as a higher spell speed. The former was more unconventional, while the latter was more stable. This choice also showed that the two of them had different paths. Kale, that's awkward identity as a former prince meant that if he wanted to continue to maintain a place in the throne conference, he had to have magic power that was no less than or second only to Duque. Jaina only needed to follow the prescribed order and become Duque's follower in the future. Of course, the most important thing was that the owner of the Holy Staff was the legacy of Jaina's previous magic teacher, Antonida's. In this life, if not for Duque's interference, Jaina might have followed the trajectory of history and become Antonida's disciple. Looking at the magic staff with 6 exquisite runes around the top, which looked like a trident, Jaina murmured, "I don't know why, but I feel that it's very familiar. Perhaps, it's fate." What could Duque say? He could only smile bitterly. Tyrant picked a staff made from Nordrassil's stained twig. After purification, it became Nordrassil's holy twig. Although it was a staff, the main bonuses were agility, endurance, critical hit, and level acceleration. This time, no raptor druid joined the hero group, so Tyrant did not hold back. When the top-tier epic double-edged sword, Groflosa Silver Hand Knight's holy sword, was also given to Mara for Dragon, a second-tier powerhouse who did not directly participate in the Lich King's crusade, everyone knew that the main event was coming. Dozens of fragments emitting powerful energy waves were gathered in the middle of Naxxramas's armory hall. Almost every powerhouse above the epic level of the Alliance was allowed to come and watch. It was different from when they defeated Yogg-Saron. At that time, there was still the Lich King, and no one was in the mood to hold a grand celebration. This time, the ceremony was more solemn and grand. This was because Duque told them that these fragments could be combined to form a powerful divine artifact. Another top-tier divine artifact. Although this was not the first time the Alliance had obtained a divine artifact. But every time a new divine artifact was born, it would always attract the attention of all busybodies. The heroes who already had a divine artifact appeared calm. According to the tacit rules, it would not be their turn. Unless every member of the hero group had at least one divine artifact. At this time, the only ones who were excited were those who did not have a divine artifact. Duque pretended to inspect it, then announced, "This is a double-edged axe." "A divine double-edged axe, who should I give it to?" Chapter 1735. Two-handed axe. When everyone heard this, the eyes of the warriors, death knights, and paladins all lit up. Although being a main tank had its privileges, and the first divine weapon, the Balrog's hand, was given to Magni, which melee fighter did not want to beat someone up? After all, those who could become bosses were usually very large in size. There were very few people like Arthas who had a normal body size. Who would want to stare at a boss's smelly feet all day and carry out boring defensive actions? There was actually an unspoken rule: in principle, the leaders of each country would take the lead, and it had to be harmonious. It would be best if the leaders of each race could have a divine weapon. The most tactful one was Danath Trollbane. Whether he was a king or a member of a hero group, he was too inexperienced. He raised his hand lightly. I still prefer to use a sword. This was a tactful rejection. There were not many warriors in the alliance, and the only one left was Muradin Bronzebeard. But his brother already had a Balrog's hammer, and Muradin was not the leader, so he was naturally happy to watch the show. As for the Death Knights, Darien had just joined the alliance, and was still the leader of a second-tier independent camp. He was not qualified. Basically, he was looking for someone from the Paladins. At this moment, a funny scene happened. Me. Hoof Imriel raised her hand high. Her bum bouncing, it felt like she was a primary school student answering a teacher's question. Merard, who was beside Hoof, face-bombed. He probably wanted to ask why he had such a weird boss. That's right, Imriel was definitely qualified. Among the 5 major races in the alliance, the humans had the most divine weapons, followed by the dwarves and elves. In theory, only the gnomes and Drenii were left. Master Craftsman Jurban Mekatok. He was a technical geek, and he was not even a professional. In theory, Imriel was the most suitable. The problem was, when it came to the distribution of divine weapons, the rules were usually to give it to each other and reluctantly accept it. At least it would look good. Now, Hoof had volunteered to sign up. Merard did not know what the others thought of it, but he felt that the Drenii's reputation had been lost. Recently, as the leader of the Drenii, Imriel had matured a lot. This caused many people to unintentionally overlook the fact that she was actually not even 20 years old. She might be able to be more serious during the throne conference, but once it was not a formal occasion, she would easily jump out. Seeing the hooves jumping around, Duque laughed heartily. By the way, I've only seen you use a one-handed hammer. Are you sure you know how to use a two-handed axe? But since I can't be a holy paladin that specializes in healing, and can't be a defensive paladin, I think I can only be a retribution paladin. Hoof honestly expressed that her healing and defense were trash. Merard covered his eyes with his big hands. He couldn't look anymore. If she wasn't the leader of the Drenii people, everyone would probably ask, is this the reason why you applied for the divine double-handed axe? Duque smiled and looked around. Then, is there any other leader who feels that they need a divine double-handed axe? If so, please state your reasons. If more than one leader wanted the same divine artifact, they hoped that they could negotiate with each other to solve it. If we can't reach an agreement, we'll vote on the spot at the throne meeting. What he heard was, of course, hee. No objections. Muradin was the first to speak. Imriel. Now that you have the divine axe, you'll have to be very fierce in the future. Gavin Raid winked. Wow. Then I'll have to attract the enemy's attention in the future. Magni also joked. Without any objections, Duque naturally followed the advice and handed all the fragments to Imriel. As the highest commander of the alliance, I declare that this fragment of the divine double-handed axe belongs to Imriel from this moment onwards. Wow, Gavin Raid whistled. Everyone applauded. Imriel eagerly took the divine artifact fragment, and then he was troubled. This. How do I reforge this divine artifact double-handed axe? Duke knew what it was, but he pretended to be ignorant. Isn't there a divine craftsman here? Duque flattered Magni. As the super-powerful person who forged Ashbringer, Magni Bronzebeard was worthy of the title of Divine Smith. He actually had a good impression of Imriel. He walked over and picked up the fragment seriously. Soon, he frowned deeply. What's wrong? Imriel asked. Magni did not answer directly. Darien, come here for a moment. The Death Knight leader strode over. The two whispered for a while, then Magni announced a piece of news that was undoubtedly a bolt from the blue to Imriel. This pile of fragments of the double-handed axe is indeed a divine artifact, but it's a shadow-type divine artifact. Through material backtracking, we found out that this weapon's name is Shadowmourne. The hoof, who was originally in high spirits, instantly felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and entered a dumbfounded state. She was a paladin, what was she doing with a shadow-type weapon? Duque snickered at the side. This was not a game. As long as the players looked cool, they would not care if it was a shadow or a flaming axe. They would not care if there was a ferocious skeleton on the axe. In reality, the Drenii worshipped light. They believed in the holy light. As the leader, Imriel, who was such a dainty female holy knight, holding a bloody and ferocious two-handed great axe and adorned with skeletons, anyone who saw it would think that Imriel had fallen into depravity. At this moment, Hoof had nothing to live for. At this moment, Hoof's entire life was gloomy. She was dumbfounded. She only felt that all the colors in her vision had turned gray. Is there still hope? Hoof murmured. Magni and Darien looked at each other. Magni sighed. This is almost impossible. Magni was basically right. That was because, apart from the insane attack power and basic strength and endurance attributes, the biggest special effect of Shadowmourne was that it had a certain chance of extracting the enemy's soul fragment to increase one's own strength. When the number of soul fragments reached 10, the special effect of Panorama would be triggered. All enemies within 15 yards would be dealt group shadow damage and greatly increase one's strength. This was a classic divine artifact that benefited oneself at the expense of others. From the perspective of judging good and evil, this could be said to be an absolute magic artifact. Hoof's face immediately collapsed. These fragments had already bound her soul to it. Only Merritt noticed that Magni had used the word almost. Wait, Your Majesty Bronzebeard, you sound like there's still a chance. Save? Of course there's a chance. Chapter 1736. Magni was a straightforward person by nature. Unless it concerned the alliance, or the survival of the dwarves, he would not lie or hide his secrets. Before Shadowmourne is recast, theoretically, there is a chance to change the properties of this divine relic. After all, light and shadow are not completely opposed to each other. They can be converted. It's like when a Nara loses all his holy energy, he will become an evil Muru. Or a certain person who suffered from a shadow curse that should have killed him 10,000 times in the past, but still managed to survive. Those who were familiar with him knew what he meant. Merritt noticed that a few alliance leaders had a look of understanding on their faces. Magni put down the fragment of Shadowmourne, and said solemnly, recasting a divine relic is no longer a task for the alliance, so this is considered a private task. I won't charge a single cent less, but I definitely won't charge more than what I should charge. Of course, Imriel, you must find that guy first and help you convert the fragment. Missions involving divine relic always seem to be full of twists and turns. Rarely was it as smooth as Solidar. Although Imriel was mentally prepared, she had to admit that she had underestimated the difficulty of obtaining this divine relic. Just like that, the gathering that was supposed to witness the creation of the divine relic ended in a slightly strange atmosphere. At night, Duque stayed in Naxxramas to rest. As expected, Duque waited for Imriel's visit. When Vanessa brought Imriel into Duque's study and left, Imriel said, I heard from Sister Jaina that you might be able to convert the fragment of Shadowmourne? Duque smiled. It was no secret among the old leaders of the Alliance that he was a shadow priest. If it was purifying the fragments of the divine relic, Tyrion and the others could do it too. But when it came to converting, only he could do it. Not maybe, but definitely. However, it was a rare opportunity to extort money. If Duque did not take advantage of it, he would not be able to face himself. Duque raised his hand, and a golden pool of high-purity holy water appeared beside him. He raised his hand again, and another pool full of shadow energy appeared. He put his hands together, and a modified Tai Chi diagram appeared. Yin-Yang Fish. This great Tao, where light and shadow blended together in harmony and unity, would make one feel that it was high-end and grand just by looking at it. Imriel was in awe. At this moment, she had completely forgotten about Merid's warning that Duque might have deliberately tempted her to take the divine artifact axe. This. Can you really do it? Yes, but it will take a lot of effort. I will have to overdraft a lot of divinity. Duque deliberately raised the price. Can I really afford it? Imriel foolishly took the bait. For a moment, Duque really felt a sense of guilt, as if he was instilling the Ito 48 punch into a lowly who believed in Santa Claus. But when he thought of his own little wish, Duque suddenly felt confident. No. The Alliance needed Divinity. Although I am a demigod, I am also the commander of the Alliance. I'm more than happy to increase the Alliance's strength. But, I have a small request. Duque tried his best to calm his voice so that he did not seem so strange. Request? Imriel gulped. Behind her, the little tail wriggled uneasily. Yes. It's really just a small request. Duque deliberated for a moment. Actually, I don't know why, but I've always been interested in your tail. Imriel's face instantly turned red. This. The tail is a special existence to the Divinity. It has a very, very special meaning. Can I say it? I don't want to say it. Then. I want to touch your tail, can I? Touch it until I'm satisfied. Duque's request made Imriel want to vomit blood on the spot. Difficult. This was really difficult. Her tail was very sensitive. But, she wanted Duque to put in so much effort to modify a divine artifact. It would be unreasonable not to pay a price. The temptation of a divine artifact was too great. Unknowingly, she remembered the scene when she beat up the Blood Queen in her enhanced state. That valiant Imriel, just thinking about it made her feel cool. Finally, Imriel gave in. Really, you can only touch my tail. Swear. You can't do other strange things. I swear. Duque made a solemn vow as if he was eating lettuce. Imriel squirmed, found a seat by the window, and brought a chair over to sit down. She was thinking that as long as she did not look at Duque, perhaps it would not be so awkward. Looking at the ice-crowned glacier might help her calm down. Seeing that Imriel was ready, Duque finally reached out his evil claws. Ugh, a high-pitched, sensitive moan startled Duque. Did I use too much force? No. This is actually my problem. Imriel resisted the strange feeling from her tail. Unknowingly, her hands were clasped tightly on the chair. She tried to focus her mind on the snow-capped mountain. However, it seemed that because she was not looking, her senses became sharper. Frankly speaking, Duque did not use too much force. At first, the light touch, like a feather brushing past, made Imriel's nerves extremely sensitive. From light to heavy, Duque simply stroked Imriel's tail like he was stroking a cat. However, the shame towards Imriel turned into a strange flow of heat in just 2 to 3 minutes, rising from the deepest part of her heart, and then converging to a place that made her extremely ashamed. Suddenly, the hoof realized that the seemingly unchanging iceberg in the distance had overlapped with her situation. Spring had come. The ice and snow melted. Drop by drop, the ice water converged into a stream. At first, all the water still gathered in the hidden cave. However, as the snow accumulated more and more, it would eventually break through everything. Accompanied by a loud noise, the water broke through the dam and poured down violently. Duque was dumbfounded. Just a moment ago, he thought that a living tail was quite cute. Before his transmigration, although he did not like his cat very much, he still often stroked its tail. After his transmigration, he secretly kept this long-lost habit. Just when Duque was having fun stroking, Imriel suddenly let out a high-pitched scream, and then collapsed on the chair with her whole body flushed. What the hell was this? The worst thing was, right at that moment, the door of the study suddenly opened, and Kalia and Queen Sylvie came together. Duque was dumbfounded, and after a long time, he said in despair, "If I said that I was just playing with her tail, and I did not touch anywhere else, would you believe me?" Chapter 1737. Kalia and Servanas were also dumbfounded. What was supposed to be a night raid had turned into a scene of catching an adulterer. To catch an adulterer, one had to be monogamous in the truest sense of the word. A great man in Du's previous life had said that a small notebook was a guarantee of property, not a guarantee of feelings. After arriving at Azeroth, Du quickly let go of himself. Duque had started a harem 20 years ago, and they all voluntarily threw themselves at him like moths to a flame. She was clearly the one who liked to add one. What right did she have to stop Duque from messing around? Moreover, Duque really wasn't pushing Hoof down. Although it looked no different from pushing her, Hoof's whole body was limp, as if she had already turned into a pool of spring mud. Every corner of her body had been drained of energy because of the extreme excitement just now, and now she didn't even want to move a finger. She had the despair of being caught. She wanted to struggle, wanted to argue, but her mouth was wide open. She could only gasp for air, unable to say a word. There was no need to mention how vexing that feeling of shyness was. Her clothes were all intact, but she had the illusion that she had been completely seen and touched. At this moment, Duque was still holding onto her tail and forgot to let go. Her little tail seemed to be struggling to escape from the devil's grasp. It suddenly jumped a few times, and Duque subconsciously tightened his grip. "Ah, no. I'm so sensitive." Hoof cried loudly again. This time, Duque was so scared that he let go. This, that. Duque didn't know how to explain at all. No matter how he explained it now, it would just be a cover-up. So awkward. Time to go. Duque gritted his teeth and stood up. I suddenly remembered that I still have a batch of urgent documents to read. I'll go back to Karazhan first. With that, Duque raised his hand and opened a portal, wanting to escape. Suddenly, there was a murderous aura. Duque was just about to move, but it was already too late. Queen Sylvanas wrapped around him like a water snake. Tonight, Queen Sylvanas was not her usual self. She was wearing a thick cloak, and as soon as she pressed against Duque's back, Duque knew why. This bulge, Servanas's imposing manner clearly showed that he wanted to surpass her big sister and third sister in terms of children. What are you feeling guilty about? Do you think that we don't know that you bullied Onyxia and provoked Vashj? But I'm a very busy queen. How can I be as free as a supreme commander like you? If there's someone who can help you vent your boring energy, I can't thank them enough. Queen Sylvie embraced Duque from behind. On the other side, Kalia had already covered her hoof with a thin blanket because of exhaustion. She raised the corner of her mouth a little mischievously. Hey! Duque, you've made her like this. If little Imriel can't get married in the future, you'll have to take responsibility. When the hoof heard that, she was so embarrassed that she actually fainted. At this moment, Duque felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Kalia's voice became an auditory hallucination, repeating endlessly in his ears. You have to take responsibility, responsible. Duque was indignant. Duque was in despair. I'm just rubbing my tail. Why do I have to take responsibility? Isn't this the same as rubbing a cat or a dog? TSK. You almost broke her, and you're treating it as normal play? No conscience. You're too stubborn. The two queens pouted at the same time. Alright, Duque, I'm not going to care about your trivial matters. Let's solve our problems today. Queen Sylvie and Kalia, one in black and the other in white, wore thick cloaks. Duque's throat made a gurgling sound as he swallowed hard. He did not know when, but he was forced from the study to the bedroom by the two women. When Duque collapsed, he soon found out that the two queens had actually used vacuum packaging tonight. What the heck? Black stockings. White stockings. Garter stockings. Long legs. Spring. Jill can forget about having a day off tonight. When Duque reacted, he heard the sound of flowing water in the fortress room that was suspended above the ice-crowned glacier. He saw the dazzling turbulent waves. They seemed to have forgotten something. That night, Duque had a dream for the first time in a long time. He dreamt that he was riding a beautiful blue female twin-horned beast, galloping forward. The twin-horned beast was so bumpy that he subconsciously held one of the horns of the twin-horned beast tightly, and then grabbed the tail of the unicorn to prevent himself from falling. Riding the horse and galloping, he was happy. If life was like this, he could die without regrets. When he woke up the next day, their eyes met. Ah! An exaggerated scream came from Duque's room. Duque's face turned pale. Oh my God! What did I do? Wait! I need some time alone. One of her hooves was so shy that she wanted to die. She directly covered her head with the blanket and put on a funny posture of an ostrich burying its head in the sand. Her little tail wagged. It was unknown whether she was smug or shy, or both. Duque. Evil thoughts grew in him. Anyway, he was going to be the scapegoat. In for a penny, in for a pound. He directly told the hooves what a backstab was. The divine sword was unsheathed. $9.99 phantom stab combo. Then, Du showed mercy and said that Imriel was actually a holy knight with strong attack power. So, for the advancement of the Alliance and for the harmony of the various races in the Alliance, he decided to fast for 3 hours. He decided to fast and bathe for 3 hours. He summoned Alonsis Fail and borrowed Naru. Finally, he cast the spell for 49 minutes. Finally, all the shards of Shadowmourne were converted to holy attributes. Since the nature of the weapon had changed, it was much easier to reforge it. The ferocious skull on the top of the original axe was removed. Under the skillful hands of the divine craftsman, Magni, it was replaced with a Naru relief, which served as a foil to Imriel's identity as a Drenii holy knight. On the 1st of June, year 26 of the Dark Portal, one of the 5 major races in the Alliance, the leader of the Drenii tribe, Imriel, obtained a divine double-handed axe that belonged solely to her. Looking at the light axe that was glowing with holy light, Imriel tried to trigger the special effect. The original version extracted the enemy's soul, but now it absorbed the enemy's shadow energy and converted it into holy energy. When the charging was complete, it would form a strengthened version of God's wrath. It would spread out like a flame, burning all evil into ashes. The attack power of this divine artifact axe was comparable to that of the Ashbringer, but its ability to harm others for its own benefit and to target evil creatures made its endurance even higher. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was definitely one of the best holy divine weapons. Imriel, with her petite body, was holding such a huge axe. It looked as strange as it could get. After Magni reforged the divine artifact for her, she went to Duke as soon as possible. So, the name, Shadow's Sorrow doesn't match an axe at all. This. Duque, can you give me a better name? Duque pondered for a moment. Since it came from Icecrown Fortress, it is a new divine weapon that was born after Frostmourne was destroyed. To differentiate it, why don't we call it flame joy? Chapter 1738. Happy Flames? What a strange name. Hoof's tail swayed left and right as if she was in a dilemma. What? You don't like it? Duque smiled but did not say anything. This name was actually the pen name of an author before he'd transmigrated. This guy's novels were good, but they were too slow. Anyway, this guy had this thought when he'd chosen this pen name. Duque might as well put him on stage as a small souvenir. On the other side, Hoof seemed to be trying to please Duque, but she still nodded. Then, I'll use this name. Happy Flames. It felt like it matched my personality quite well. Even though I can accept those heavy things and know that sacrifices are inevitable in battle, I'm still willing to be a little more optimistic. I'm already very happy just looking at you. Duque spoke the truth. Looking at such a straightforward girl, he felt much more at ease. Keeping an eye on the Alliance's general situation every day, reading mountains and oceans of official documents, and balancing the interests of different nations and races as much as possible to resolve disputes. He was already tired enough. It was also a very good psychological relief to have this happy person. Seeing that no one was paying attention to her, Hoof's face and neck instantly turned red, and her little tail swayed a lot more. She was clearly nervous. Well, Duque. My tail hurt a little last time. Can you take a look at it tonight? As she spoke, her face had already turned red from her neck to the top of her breasts. Well, I have an appointment with Gerben tonight to check on the latest weapon research. I might have to stay up all night. Duque deliberately said that he was not free. Almost at the same time, Duque saw Hoof's tail droop like rice under the scorching sun. Is that so? Then. Next time. As the leader of the Divinity, Hoof was also quite busy. Especially since the Divinity had only been in Azeroth for less than a year, there were too many construction projects and settlement issues that she had to follow up on. Suddenly, she thought of something. After the war, Professor Willen asked me to come here more often. He said that it would be of great help to the revival of the Divinity race. Although I don't quite understand why, I think I'll have the opportunity to come and find you often. Duque felt a sense of despair on the spot. You're so dumb and adorable to this extent. Hoof, you're really amazing. The Divinity wanted to build their main city, Exodar, because they lacked manpower, money, and resources. Other than crying for supplies, what else could he be here for? Damn it, you've been sold off by your own mentor, yet you're still helping him count the money. At this moment, Duque was absolutely sure that Willen, that cunning old fox, had calculated this point. He sold the hoof to him, knowing that he wouldn't mistreat the hoof. Duque immediately changed his mind. In any case, he would definitely suffer a loss. Since he had already suffered a great loss, he might as well take it back. Oh, no, it should be a small psychological comfort for the time being. Duque pretended to take out his schedule, and then crossed out the last few lines of the factory inspection schedule at the bottom. Okay, I'm finally free for the late night slot. That night, Duque rubbed his tail all night, and while he was at it, he did some stabbing and whatnot. Thanks to Duque's scheme to kill Nesario, the expected cataclysm, or rather, earth fission, did not come immediately after Northren's crusade. This allowed the Alliance and Horde to catch a rare breath. With a stroke of his pen, Duque changed the post-war national plan to 30% military and 70% civilian. All the factories in the army cancelled the 3-shift system and changed it to a 2-shift system. The surplus production capacity of the military factories was transferred to the shipbuilding industry. There was one more thing that Duque was very strict about, hoarding a large amount of food, and still prohibiting large-scale brewing. As a transmigrator, Duque naturally knew what the cataclysm's precursors were. Therefore, according to his memories from before he transmigrated, Duque planned to migrate the population of the areas that were very likely to be destroyed, and set up a large number of magic cannons in the major cities. Strictly speaking, the cataclysm was caused by the four major elements working together. Duque, who had always been good at planning ahead, first cut off the orders for tanks and flying warships. Conventional cannons that used TNT explosives were not good for any of the four major elements. At this point in time, Pharaoh was destined to enter the peak of his life. Therefore, Duque stepped up the construction of the magic net, as well as the training of beginner mages. It would take more than 10 years to nurture a radiant moon mage. In the past, it was very difficult to nurture a magic apprentice into a qualified earth mage, because it required talent, comprehension, perseverance, and a lot of practice. Now that the magic net existed, the requirements in this regard were greatly reduced. As long as one had a bit of magic talent and could sense the elements, Duque could use the magic net to help them master basic magic in the shortest time possible. This kind of simplification was almost as brainless as the legendary one-button casting. This caused a large number of traditional mages to call this retrogression and degeneration. But it was undeniable that the number of registered official mages in the Alliance had directly exceeded 50,000. This was a very exaggerated number. After all, before the first year of the Dark Portal, the entire Dalajan only had 4 official mages. Everything was like this. Only by increasing the base number could there be more room to choose the elites. Another thing that made the Alliance's soldiers feel more at ease was that the 4 guardians of Alcavan had brought their own underlings and were stationed in several major cities of the Alliance as guardians. Iron Furnace had gained the favor of Rock Guardian Alcavan. New Silvery Moon was overseen by the Storm Warden Amaran. Originally, Flame Guardian Coralon and Ice Guardian Turawan were willing to follow Duque to Karazhan. Duque thought about it again and convinced the 2 guardians to let Turawan go to Theramore and let Coralon guard Stormwind City. In addition, after some communication with Oder and the other guardians, Freya was a guest in Darnassus as a nature consultant. Mimiran, on the other hand, built a new workshop in Lordaeron to develop new military equipment. Hodor went to Exodar. Duque did not hesitate to let all the large cities in the Alliance with a population of more than 200,000 people have at least one demigod guarding them for a long time. It could be said that in this rare period of free time, although Duque had adjusted the Alliance's economy to be mainly civilian, in reality, this was another kind of armed to the teeth. Interestingly, Duque waited for a long time, but the cataclysm did not come. Instead, the birth of his 2 children finally came. Yes, Aurelia and Sasha pestered Duque, asking Duque to input magical energy. Duque could not stand it and shamefully gave in. Chapter 1739. The Dark Portal, 30th of September, Stormwind City, Duke Marcus Mansion. This test. I didn't make it through after all. Grieving, Duque gently took off the last piece of clothing on someone else's wife with his hands trembling with despair. That bright and clean body, that pink and tender skin, just like that. Duque. Have you changed your diaper? Aurelia's shout came from next door. I've changed it. Now. Duque responded in despair, then looked at his 3-month-old daughter, Enilus Marcus, who would giggle at him. Duque had lived 2 lives, but he had never felt the loss of his moral integrity as he did now. He raised his head, his face 45 degrees to the sky, and a drop of true crocodile tear finally fell from the corner of his eye. With the most touching magnetic voice, he called out to his compatriots on earth far away. Alas! Young people, don't think that there will always be a free lunch. If you get on the bus and don't jump out of it for a moment, then you'll have to pay for it. This was definitely Duque's most profound experience. Since his transmigration, Duque had always felt that Azeroth had been good to him. Although he died at the beginning, he could be resurrected. Then he sent girls, system elves, and Duque ascended to godhood. It stood to reason that Duque should not be dissatisfied. After so much time had passed, Duque felt that he seemed to have been tricked. If he had shot the girls of Azeroth and then ran away, maybe the will of Azeroth really could not do anything to him. But with a child, everything was different. In a real sense, he was connected with the fate of this planet. Alas! For this bit of sugar, he had to swallow artillery shells and fight the Burning Legion on behalf of Azeroth. It was really tiring. Big sister, didn't we agree not to change Duque's diaper? Sylvanas' voice came from outside the door. It's just a test. The door opened, and a group of brides in white wedding dresses barged in. They surrounded Duque, who was holding a cotton diaper, with the ferocious momentum of a crowd that wanted to know the truth. That's right. In the end, Duque was unable to dodge this attack. Although Duque knew that this day would come sooner or later, he still sighed when it really came. Sometimes, Duque even maliciously speculated that if Nesario did not die, and directly let the Cataclysm take advantage of the wrath of the Lich King to attack him, would he have the chance to continue to escape from reality and avoid the forced marriage? If the villains didn't cause trouble, Duque would have no excuse. Most importantly, Duque accidentally killed someone. As if they were stimulated by Arthas's complete fall, whether it was Kalia or Sylvanas, after that day, they often came together to find Duque. Duque often couldn't control himself and ended up losing his life. It seemed like it happened at the same time. Now that Kalia was more than 4 months pregnant, it was almost to the point where he couldn't hide it anymore. In fact, after knowing that Kalia was pregnant and insisted on giving birth, Duque knew that he couldn't avoid this attack. Although Aurelia and Winrisa were the leaders of the Silver Dawn and didn't have that much influence, Kalia and Sylvanas were queens, and the queens of a large country at that. It wouldn't be good if they got pregnant out of wedlock. After some discussion, Duque's harem unanimously decided to let Duque marry Sylvanas, Kalia, Elucia, and Jaina in one go. In fact, if it wasn't for the bad influence, Tyrant and Hoof would have wanted to marry Windrunner's eldest and third sisters. Aurelia and Winrisa didn't want to marry Duque with Sylvanas to avoid affecting the royal power of the Sin Dorii kingdom. Tyrant was the high priestess of the Night Elves and a saintess. Before she stepped down, she wouldn't dare to mess around. But recently, Fandral Staghelm had been very active. Hoof. To be honest, most of the humans in the Alliance had started to accept the Draenei who looked like Eridar, but they weren't ready to accept such a large-scale interracial marriage. In comparison, the Blood Elves, who had skin color similar to humans, were more acceptable. So, Hoof had to suffer. Marrying 4 women at once with the status of a co-wife, and 4 freaking queens at that, was definitely a huge blow to the monogamous tradition of Azeroth. Even an honest person like Theon said that this was a bit too shocking for the people of Azeroth. Fortunately, Duque had a way to deal with it: hire a paid army to create hype. Although Duke Marcus dated 4 queens as a mortal, he's already a demigod. As an immortal in the world of Azeroth, how can he be compared to a mortal? His Majesty Menethil, Barav, and Proudmoore are also women who have been granted eternal life. We shouldn't use the rules of the mortal world to restrict them. Gods belong to the gods, mortals belong to mortals. After some fooling, the commotion within the Alliance finally subsided. Originally, Duque had promised that the Burning Legion would arrive in about 10 years. After the final battle with the Burning Legion, if Azeroth won, he would step down from his position as the commander of the Alliance. His wives would also step down to prevent the formation of an eternal kingdom. The other countries in the Alliance didn't have much of an opinion. If you can remain as wise as you are now, it doesn't matter if you continue to lead the Alliance. After all, the dwarves aren't a short-lived race, Magni said. The dwarf has the same opinion. Great craftsman Jurbin nodded. As long as your eternal life doesn't bring about corruption. Varian curled his lips. As long as the alliance doesn't become an empire, the various countries and races can still decide if they want to leave or not. That's fine. Danath Trollbane was very straightforward. Since no one had any objections, and ignoring Duque's weak voice that the Burning Legion couldn't be extinguished, Duque's harem happily decided that the 4 queens would marry Duque. It was tomorrow, the 1st of October. Come, let's see who's prettier in our wedding dresses. Queen Sylvia pulled Duque's hand and dragged her over. The third sister, Sasha, took over the job of wrapping diapers. It had to be said that all 4 queens were extremely beautiful. The biggest selling point of Queen Sylvia's wedding dress was her long legs. It was a white dress that looked like a ranger's short skirt. The only thing that didn't show through was the top half, while the bottom half was completely a thin white muslin, showing off her long legs. Kalia was dressed in pure white, and still had a girlish waistline, making her look as pure and beautiful as Snow White. Chapter 1740. The biggest feature of Alicia's wedding gown was its various hollowness and gold trimming. It fully displayed the Barav family's wealth. As for Jaina, her low-cut wedding dress accentuated her voluptuous figure, second only to Aurelia's. Duque, who's the prettiest among us? If it had been one of them, it would have been devastating. However, when the 4 queens who were about to become brides asked at the same time, Duque was in a bind. Usually, the 4 of them were busy like dogs, and the other 3 queens were quite diligent. Although Kalia was a mascot, she preferred to run around Lordaeron, inspecting the people and consoling them. Because they were all busy, they were not like the harem of the emperors on earth, where they were all scheming and scheming. They were usually as close as sisters, and even accompanied Duque in his craziness. It was impossible to say that they did not have a competitive heart. Wasn't this? As soon as the question was asked, they each made a big move. Queen Sylvanas, who had always been domineering, seemed to have finally let go of the hatred in her heart after Arthas's demise. Although she was pregnant now, the crystallization of love between demigods was not that easy to settle. Just the fusion of divinity and the injection of powerful magic would consume a lot of time and energy. Not only was her pregnancy likely to last longer than her sister's, but her belly was also not bulging at all. Without the shocking aura of wanting to kill people all day, Queen Sylvanas exuded the unique allure of a wife. As a matter of fact, Queen Sylvanas, who never liked to be pretentious, actually pulled up the left side of her skirt with one hand, revealing a perfect and beautiful leg. Wow! Long legs? Beside her, Alicia knew that her body proportion could not compete with Queen Sylvanas, and actually shyly turned sideways. Her beautiful back, which was partly hidden by the hollowed-out wedding dress, showed the perfect curve of her butt. Seeing this, Duque's cock moved. Of course, the more exciting thing was yet to come. Without Aurelia, Jaina's Theramore peak was still quite fierce. With a slight bend, under the effect of gravity, the violent beauty of the mass easily blinded Duque's eyes. Everyone was clearly immortal, so why could Jaina still grow and approach Aurelia's level? Among the 4 women, Kalia's figure was the slimmest. Everyone was wondering what kind of sexy pose she would put on. In the end, Kalia didn't pose at all. She just held a bunch of pure white lilies, slightly tilted her head, and revealed a pure and beautiful smile. Oh my God! No matter how many years had passed, Duque would never get tired of looking at that pure beauty that seemed to have solidified for eternity. Alright. Here comes the problem. What if *King 4 choices? How do you expect Duque to choose? All of you are the prettiest in my heart. Duque decisively chose to muddle through. No. You have to choose one. If you don't choose today, don't even think about leaving. Choose. Duque, no matter who you choose, we won't blame you. The four girls attacked Duque from all sides. If Dumuk was still a hot-headed teenager, he might have chosen it on impulse. But in the queen's harem, whoever chose her would be a fool. Do you believe that the alliance will break apart? Since they were starting a harem, they would either have one big and all small, or they would all be big. Aurelia wasn't here to hold the fort. If Duque still dared to give them a high ground, he would be courting death. He couldn't choose. He definitely couldn't choose. Even if he had to endure the 10 great tortures of the Qing dynasty, he couldn't choose. Even though he was surrounded by the White Mount Hyjal, and even though the beautiful faces were as beautiful as flowers, Duque felt like he was living in hell. Just as Duque was about to vent his anger and shout, "If you keep messing around, I won't marry anyone," suddenly, a tremor came from the heavens and the earth. Rumble. This wasn't an adjective. It was a real earthquake. Rumble. Another sound rang out. This time, all the women reacted. The two mothers reacted the fastest. Aurelia put Annihilus in a slanted bag, while Sasha hugged Duque's other daughter, Atlanta. They hurried over to meet everyone. Queen Sylvanas was also very fast. She quickly took off her wedding dress and put on her ranger outfit in a few seconds. The other three women also changed their clothes in a hurry. Rumble. Continuous tremors came. Duque opened the window and looked out. He saw that there were small cracks on the outer walls of many houses. F***ck. It can't be. Even though Duque had waited for this day for a long time, he didn't expect that this day would come when he was about to get married. Duque. Can you feel it? As a demigod of wind, at least half of Queen Sylvanas' mind was maintaining the elemental realm, so she was the most sensitive. She clearly felt that the entire wind elemental realm was restless. I heard Al-Akir's voice. He's issuing a declaration of challenge to the entire Azeroth. Vashj, who was dressed in a maid's outfit, entered the room and said in a deep voice, "The water elemental realm is a little different." As a demigod directly under Azeroth, Vashj, who was in charge of Lordamir Lake, was also well aware of the unusual movements in the water elemental realm. Originally, the black dragons were all of the earth attribute. Unfortunately, Onyxia was a different species. She played with fire. She also came, but she smiled bitterly and shook her head, "I can't feel anything." Instead, Duque could feel that his old friend who couldn't hold back his temper in the land of fire let out a deafening roar in that world of fire. Duque, Marcus, that was a declaration of war. Duque tilted his head slightly. Wind Elemental Lord Al-Akir and Fire Elemental Lord Ragnaros were expected opponents who would come to cause trouble sooner or later. Duque had a doubt. Who gave them the courage to cause trouble when Nisario's grave was already 3 feet high? However, he still had to do what he had to do. In the Holy Light Cathedral of Stormwind City, in a very secret basement, an old man in a white robe led a group of black-robed believers to carry out some kind of evil ritual that was the complete opposite of the Holy Light. The old man raised his hands high and shouted in a passionate voice. "It's here. The long-awaited trial of Twilight is here. Azeroth will return to the rule of the great ancient god. All the creation of the usurper will be destroyed. Only the truly devout can live on after the day of judgment. Only the faceless, the Twilight Dragon, the Eternal Dragon, the elemental creatures, these selected creatures, as well as the most devout Twilight believers, can share the glory of the ancient gods in this new world shrouded in shadows." When the fanatical atmosphere was about to sweep the entire basement, suddenly, 2 sharp daggers silently stabbed into the back of the old man in a white robe. Chapter 1741. Time seemed to have frozen. At that moment, all the black-robed believers were stunned. The two robust figures that jumped out from the seemingly empty air were definitely not mediocre fighters. That was because ordinary bandits would not be able to get close to the white-robed elder. The elder was wearing the robe of the Archbishop of the Holy Light. However, the moment the two incomparably sharp daggers pierced his body, the energy that erupted from the old man's body like a raging sea was actually of the shadow attribute. Twilight Shock Wave. This was the signature move of the High Priest of the Twilight Church. Even though the two bandits had activated Shadow Cloak and temporarily hid in the shadow plane to avoid this attack, the powerful energy shock still injured them slightly. No one would have thought that the heavily injured elder would be able to switch between the shadow and holy forms like Duke and cast a greater healing spell in the blink of an eye. It was a pity that his healing magic was interrupted by the third thief who got close to him. The elder's hood was unknowingly shaken off by this kick, revealing a face that was enough to shock countless people. "It's really you, Benedettas." As the situation entered a stalemate, the three bandits stopped attacking and pulled down their hoods. They were the Van Cleef father and daughter, as well as the blood elf bandit, Valera, who almost never left Varian's side. At the same time, the walls of the entire basement shone brightly. Dozens of teleportation portals opened at the same time, and an entire team of holy knights rushed out from them. Not only were these holy knights powerful professionals who were on the verge of reaching the hero level, but they were also led by the 5 silver saints, Tyrion, Gavin Rad, Riadaline, Iriel, and Merid. Almost all the most powerful clergymen in the entire alliance were here. Tyrion's face was filled with the deepest sorrow. "Why is it you, Benedettas? We used to." Perhaps Benedettas did not give the leaders of the alliance a strong sense of presence. He was undoubtedly one of the oldest members of the alliance's hero squad. As the disciple of the former Archbishop of the Holy Light Alonso's Fail, Benedettas was actually quite famous. It was just that he didn't become a paladin like Uther and the other so-called priests who could fight and tank, so he wasn't as famous. Once upon a time, as a devout priest, Benedictus had lived up to his beliefs. In this life, during the darkest times of the Stormwind during the first and second battle of the Dark Portal, he had pacified the wandering citizens and calmed the panic in their hearts. It could be said that Duque and Anduin were able to quickly assemble a battle-ready army thanks to Benedettas. The people praised him as the incarnation of holy light, and he was the faith of countless people. Together with Duque, Anduin, and Turalian, he held up the sky of hope for the people of Stormwind at that time. After the end of World War II, Archbishop Fail passed away, Duque and Karazhan went missing, and King Langrin was assassinated. With his devout faith, he continued to give hope and courage to countless people of Stormwind, and watched over Varian's growth. After Varian grew up, he relied on Benedettas as one of his most trusted advisors and life mentors. He would seek Benedettas' advice on many important matters. At the same time, although Benedettas' reputation among the people grew, he gradually kept a low profile, and began to participate less and less in the political affairs of Stormwind. After Duque returned, he was transferred to the hero squad. However, if Duque hadn't mentioned it, no one would have noticed that Benedettas had shadow force in his body. This elder, who had risen to the position of Archbishop of Stormwind with his seniority, had always claimed that he was only a pure priest of the Holy Church. Duque's seemingly unintentional teasing, "Oh, Benedettas, you've also practiced shadow force," attracted the attention of MI7 in Stormwind. Recently, there had been a dark force in Stormwind that was promoting the end of the world, and its leader was a powerful, Twilight priest. When the leader of MI7, Matthias Shore, asked Duque about it, Duque sold Benedettas out. Hence, the scene of a group of kidney knights surrounding the Twilight believers. The crowd parted, and Varian, who was holding the divine double-edged blade, arrived at the scene of confrontation with Brawl Bearskin. Varian ignored the shivering believers, and looked directly at Benedettas, who was seriously injured on the altar. "Tell me, Benedettas. When did you fall?" Benedetto's face turned pale. He knew that he might not be able to escape this time. If it were Varian and the other two, they might be able to break out of the encirclement by sacrificing some believers. Since the Van Cleef father and daughter were here, it meant that the operation had been approved by Duque. Moreover, apart from Duque, there was no one else who could mobilize such a powerful lineup of kidney knights. He turned his head and looked at the dark dome of the basement. There were several elemental auras in that direction that were so strong that anyone with a little elemental sensitivity could sense them. Benedetto's did not answer the question. Duke Marcus, you're really good at scheming. You knew it from the start, and yet you let me work for nothing for so many years? The Archbishop of Twilight Light was right. Duque was just that shameless. Who asked the Alliance Hero Squad to have a hard time finding a priest back then? Now that Kalia and Sally Whitemane had grown up, and there was also Fail, the elemental emissary, Benedetto's dared to jump out, and so did Duque. Of course, with Benedetto's level, there was no need for Duque or those demigods to do anything. In the basement, Varian was furious. Answer me, answer. Why should I answer? Doesn't Duke Marcus still know how to use shadow energy? Benedetto's old and kind face revealed a sinister and cunning look that did not match his temperament. Don't confuse them. We all know that Duque has fallen into Archimonde's trap, and that's why he has no choice but to use shadow energy. Theon the Honest was furious. Surging waves of holy light spread from under his feet, and several Twilight Light believers were bathed in flames. They screamed and fell to the ground. For the ancient gods, Benedetto suddenly raised his hands, and all the Twilight Light believers began a desperate, suicidal charge towards Varian and the others. There was no suspense in this battle. Apart from Benedetto's, there were only two people present who could fight. One was the elemental creature Aquilian, and the other was the blood elf bounty hunter Ashila Lemmingstar. If they were left alone, they might cause a lot of damage. But in this situation where the big shots of the Alliance had teamed up, their resistance would only cause a small ripple before they were completely drowned by the holy light. Chapter 1742. Throughout the history of the Alliance and the Horde in Azeroth, many major losses were caused by traitors. As the saying went, the strongest fortress was often the easiest to break through from within. The original version of the Gate of Heaven's Wrath was like this, and the Twilight Hammer in the Cataclysm was also like this. With Dumuk, a transmigrator, traitors were like ants in a cage. If they dared to jump around, they would be drowned in a pig's cage at any time. Considering that Benedetto's was one of the most popular bishops of the Holy Light after Alonso's fail, William couldn't bear to reveal all of his secrets to the public. An hour later, Stormwind officially announced that Archbishop Benedetto's had been ambushed during the battle with the ancient god Yogg-Saron. After his mind was eroded, he joined the Twilight Hammer, a subordinate organization of the ancient god. When he came to his senses, he was besieged by the Twilight believers and died in battle. When people learned that even guardians like Tarim and Freya had been brainwashed in that battle, they suddenly felt that Benedetto's fall could be accepted. People felt sad and regretful, and thousands of people even spontaneously organized to pray for Benedetto's death. This was also a way to protect the reputation of Stormwind, the Church of Holy Light, and even Benedetto's himself. The Northern Expedition Coalition Army had already given the song Bleak to the evil Yogg-Saron, so naturally, there was a silly dragon who took the blame. Regardless of whether the Twilight believers believed it or not, the Alliance believed it. Even Duque was surprised by this outcome. The wedding was supposed to be held tomorrow, but the invasion of the elemental creatures was imminent. This wedding was destined to be cancelled. Goddamn elemental lord. You're Al-Akir, right? Let's settle our old and new grudges. Queen Sylvanas was the most emotional. She had finally let go of her hatred and was ready to settle down as a wife, but Queen Sylvanas lost her temper, and no one could stop her. Son. Yeah, she had temporarily sealed her god. Be good, baby. When your mom overturns Al-Akir, I'll give him to you after I purify his elements. Servana's words made Duque pray for Al-Akir in his heart. If Queen Syriana really gave birth to a child after defeating Al-Akir and obtaining the complete share of the wind element, the child would probably be the strongest windrunner in history. The queens had agreed with Duque that their firstborn children would all follow their mother's surname in order to inherit the throne. If he had another child, it would be like Aurelia and Sasha's daughter, who would take Duque's surname as Marcus. The four queens were so angry that they gritted their teeth. At the same time, they were secretly glad that the ancient gods did not cause trouble on the 1st of October. Otherwise, it would have turned into a bloody wedding. That would have been a lifetime of regret. One must know that their entire life, if nothing unexpected happens, would be infinite. At the same time that the wedding was cancelled, the entire alliance entered a state of alert. As an ally of the alliance, the Horde also received the notification. The tribe was a pain in the ass. The Horde's recent situation was still quite bad. It was very likely that the cataclysm was coming, causing the elements to be in disorder and the weather to be abnormal. The Horde's food shortage was still very big this year. In the Battle of Northrend at the beginning of the year, the Horde lost 200,000 young adults, which to some extent alleviated the pressure of food shortage. However, the young adults were the main fighting force and labor force. After all, it was a very sad thing to lose them. If it was possible, Sal would rather it be the 200,000 people over 50 who died. After 50 years of age, the Beastmen's fighting power would decline sharply, and they would basically become the burden of the tribe. According to tradition, this part of the Beastmen would be abandoned by the tribe. Perhaps they would fight day after day on the front lines of hunting dangerous creatures to prove themselves, or perhaps they would die silently in the process. However, after the influx of ideas from the Alliance, the tribe gradually changed. The old people, or the Beastmen who were about to step into the age of the elderly, started to question why the Alliance could provide for the elderly, but not the Horde. The Alliance had a perfect retirement system. The retired veterans would first receive a retirement compensation that was enough for them to build a small house with a garden in their hometown. In addition, they could also enjoy a generous monthly allowance for up to 36 months. Then, the government of the place where the veterans were registered had the obligation to provide re-employment training. From simple town patrols to training in all kinds of professional skills. As long as they were willing, the local factories had to give priority to hiring retired veterans as workers. If they wanted to do business, they could also get a warehouse for train carriages at a discounted price, or buy old warships or transport ships that the Alliance had retired at the lowest price. Many veterans did not lack courage. It was these veterans who drove old warships and transport ships to support the campaign against the Lich King. During the war, retired veterans contributed in this way. Once they entered peaceful times, they would also enjoy the most preferential tax rates and various tax rebates. Duque had used a policy that surpassed the times and was closely integrated with the war to revitalize the entire alliance. People always sought benefits. Seeing this, the old Beastmen also asked Sal to implement a similar policy. Unfortunately, the Alliance and the Horde were born with different economic structures, and the Horde did not have the luxury to play with this kind of welfare system. In recent months, there had been no foreign war to divert the attention of the Horde, and internal conflicts could be said to have escalated again. The traditional Beastmen from Draenor Nagrand once again advocated expansion, and this gave Sal a headache. Those crude and ignorant traditional Beastmen did not know that with the current power ratio of the Alliance Horde, once a war broke out, it was likely that the Horde would be completely erased from the map of Azeroth within a few months, but Sal did not have the time to care about those traditionalists. Because people from the Ring of Earth had come. The Ring of Earth was a shaman organization in the world of Azeroth. Contrary to what some people thought, the Ring of Earth was not established to fight the Twilight Hammer, especially those conflicts that had recently escalated. The purpose of the organization was actually to suppress the elemental spirits. These elemental spirits contained chaos and destruction in their nature, but they also had rational and intelligent behavior. The Tauren had their own shaman race a long time ago, but the Ring of Earth itself was indeed established recently. Outsiders only noticed the existence of the Ring of Earth about 150 years ago. The original shamans who created the Ring of Earth believed that someone had to prevent the destruction caused by the elemental spirit's anger. Otherwise, the entire plane would be in great danger. Therefore, after countless meetings and agreements, they formed the Ring of Earth of today. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.